There's a town somewhere in America. It sits in a state that has never been named. Its streets run through neighborhoods that feel familiar without being specific. There is a nuclear power plant on the edge of it with 2 cooling towers that breathe pale steam into the sky, whether it is summer or winter, morning or the middle of the night. There is a tire fire somewhere nearby that has been burning continuously for decades, and nobody talks about it anymore. There is a river with 3-eyed fish. There is a bar called Moe's Tavern where the same men have sat on the same stools for as long as anyone can remember. And at 742 Evergreen Terrace, there is a house with a red door and a green lawn, and a family inside who have been living there since December 17th, 1989. The Simpsons. If you are watching this, if you already know them, you have probably known them for most of your life. Homer Simpson, the safety inspector at the nuclear plant, round and well-meaning and endlessly, catastrophically human. Marge, his blue-haired wife, patient and warm and holding everything together with something that is not quite effort, but is not quite ease either. Bart, 10 years old for 35 years now, chalk in hand, detention in his future. Lisa, 8 years old forever, saxophone under her arm, already aware of things the adults around her haven't noticed yet. And Maggie, the baby, watching everything from behind her pacifier with eyes that see more than she lets on. The Simpsons first aired on the Fox network on December 17, 1989. As of the time this was written, the show has aired 803 episodes across 37 seasons and is officially renewed through season 40. That makes it the longest-running primetime scripted television series in American history. Nothing else comes close. In all those years, across all those episodes, the writers left certain doors open, certain questions that were never answered, not because they forgot, not because the production was rushed or the writing was careless, but because some of those mysteries were designed that way on purpose, built into the architecture of the show from the very beginning, gifts wrapped in ambiguity and left on the doorstep for 35 years of fans to find and examine and argue about and never quite solve. Tonight, we're going to sit with every single one of them. This is a long video. It is meant to be long. There is no rush here. The questions we're going to explore have waited 35 years for someone to look at them carefully, so we're going to take our time. Find somewhere comfortable. Let the room go quiet around you. Let your breathing slow down. Springfield is still there. It has been there every night for 35 years, and it will be there when you fall asleep, and it will be there when you wake up. Let's begin. There are towns named Springfield in 34 states, maybe more depending on how you count. They are in Illinois and Massachusetts and Oregon and Missouri and Vermont and Virginia and a dozen other places, spread across the country like a name someone scattered without thinking. The Simpsons creator Matt Groening chose the name precisely because of that. He said he picked it because he wanted everyone to feel like it was their Springfield. He wanted the show to be set in the American Evertown, the place that represents all places, the street corner that could be your street corner. For 35 years, it has worked. Fans have spent those 3 decades arguing about which real Springfield the Simpsons Springfield might actually be. They have compiled geographic clues from hundreds of episodes. They have built spreadsheets. They have drawn maps. They have applied logic from radio station, naming conventions, and road trip distances, and climate patterns, and mountain profiles. And after all of that, the answer remains exactly what the writers intended it to be from the very beginning. Nobody knows, and the writers will never tell. But here's the thing that makes this particular mystery so endlessly satisfying to sit with. The show has never simply ignored the question. The writers have spent 35 years actively, gleefully, deliberately making it impossible to answer. They planted clues. They walked right up to the edge of revealing the location and then stepped back, sometimes mid-sentence, sometimes mid-frame, sometimes with a character's head obscuring the exact spot on a map that would have resolved everything. The mystery of Springfield's location is not a plot hole or an oversight. It is a running act of authorial mischief that has been going on since the early 90s and shows no signs of stopping. Let's start with the most obvious clue, the one that feels like it should narrow things down significantly, but somehow makes everything more confusing. In the Simpsons movie, released in 2007, there is a moment where Ned Flanders turns to Bart and explains that the state where Springfield is located is bordered by Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. This sounds like a straightforward geographic clue. Write it down, pull up a map, and figure out which state has those 4 neighbors. But here's the problem. Ohio and Kentucky are real neighboring states. They share a border. But Nevada is in the American Southwest, and Maine is in the far northeastern corner of the country. No state on any map, real or fictional, shares borders with all 4 of those places simultaneously. The geography is impossible. And it was meant to be impossible. Executive producer Al Jean confirmed afterward that the line was designed to send fans on a search that could never conclude. And he called the result proof that you are a true Simpsons fan if you keep trying. The show has been doing this for decades before the movie. In Season 7, Episode 23, titled Much Apu About Nothing, there is a scene where Lisa is about to show Apu and Homer exactly where Springfield sits on a map of the United States. She points to the map, her finger moves toward the location. And then Bart walks in front of her, his head blocking the camera's view of exactly the spot she was indicating. You can see that she is pointing somewhere in the central part of the map, west of the coast, east of the Rocky Mountains. But Bart's head covers the precise location with what feels, in retrospect, like surgical precision. This was not an accident of animation. This was a deliberate choice by the writers to dangle the answer in front of the audience and then snatch it away at the last possible moment. Then there is the radio station. In Season 5, Bart wins a contest run by Springfield's local radio station, KBBL. That call sign, KBBL, is the key. In the United States, the Federal Communications Commission has a long-standing rule about radio station call signs. Stations located east of the Mississippi River use call signs that begin with the letter. Stations located west of the Mississippi River use call signs that begin with the letter K. Springfield Station begins with K. This eliminates the entire eastern half of the United States from consideration. The Simpsons live somewhere west of the Mississippi River. And a handful of grandfathered stations in eastern cities still use K call signs for historical reasons, so the clue is not absolutely definitive. But it is consistent with a theory that has been building for years, that Springfield is somewhere in the western interior of the United States, probably not on the coast, probably not in the deep south, probably in a state that is geographically central enough to have mountains nearby and a plausible coastline, and the kind of weather that can be anything the episode needs it to be. Which brings us to the geography problem. The Simpsons' Springfield has been depicted with an ocean nearby. It has been depicted with mountain ranges visible from downtown. It has been depicted with desert. It has been depicted with dense forest, including what appear to be redwood trees in at least one episode. So Lisa once mentioned that West Springfield is 3 times the size of Texas, which would make it larger than any real American state. The town has a canyon. It has an offshore oil platform. It has a coastline. It has a ski resort within driving distance. No real American state or region contains all of these geographic features simultaneously. Springfield is not in any real American geography. Springfield is in a geography that exists to serve whatever story is being told. That is the deeper answer to the Springfield question, and it is the one that the writers have been gesturing towards since the beginning. Springfield is not meant to be located. It is meant to be everywhere. But that has not stopped the evidence from accumulating. In Season 11, Episode 19, Kill the Alligator and Run, the Simpsons visit Florida. By the end of the episode, they have been banned from the state. In the same episode, it is revealed that the family has been banned from every other state as well. Every state except Arizona and North Dakota. Bart votes for the Dakotas. The family heads north. This seems on its surface like a joke, But if taken literally, it confirms that Springfield is not in any of the banned states. It is not in the Deep South. It is not in the Midwest, not in New England, not in the Mid-Atlantic. It is somewhere they have not yet been banned from, or somewhere that exists outside the normal geography of the show, which brings us back to the same impossibility. In Season 11, Episode 22, the mockumentary episode Behind the Laughter, the Simpsons are described as a northern Kentucky family. This was broadcast that way. And then, in subsequent syndicated airings of the episode, the description was silently changed to Missouri. The writers noticed the mistake, recognized that Kentucky was one of the borders of the impossible state from the movie, and changed the line without announcement. This is the kind of thing that only happens when someone is actively maintaining a mystery, keeping track of which states have been named as clues and which states have been named as locations, and carefully preventing the two categories from overlapping. Then there is the driver's license. In at least one episode, Homer's driver's license is visible on screen. The state abbreviation reads NT and TA depending on which frame you freeze. These abbreviations do not correspond to any real American state. They have led to a persistent fan theory, which originated as a joke by director David Silverman, that Springfield exists in a fictional state called North Tacoma. North Tacoma does not appear on any real map. Its existence within the show is never confirmed. But its abbreviation appears, and nobody has ever explained it away. In Season 7, Episode 12, Team Homer, during the town sequence, the camera briefly pans over what appears to be a map of Springfield State. The capital is labeled Capital City, not Springfield, Capital City. This detail matters because in at least one other episode, the show confirms that Capital City is a real destination within the universe of the show, a larger nearby city that characters occasionally travel to. The capital of Springfield State is not Springfield. Springfield is just a mid-sized town in a state whose capital is called, with an almost aggressive lack of imagination, Capital City. And now there is the question of what Groening himself has actually said. In 2012, Smithsonian Magazine published an interview with Groening in which he appeared to confirm that Springfield was based on Springfield, Oregon. He grew up in Portland. Springfield, Oregon is just south of Portland. He said he named the town after it. The story spread, headlines declared the mystery solved. And then, almost immediately, executive producer Al Jean issued a clarification to TV Guide. He said that the magazine had misinterpreted something Groening had been saying for years. Groening was inspired by his Oregon childhood. Parts of the show were informed by his memories of Portland and the surrounding area. But there is no specific state that Springfield is in, Jean said, and they will never reveal that secret. The show's response to the magazine story was a chalkboard gag. Bart Simpson stood at the blackboard and wrote over and over the same sentence, filling line after line with careful chalk letters. The true location of Springfield is in any state but yours. That is the official position. That is the answer the show has chosen to give. And yet, if you look at the evidence cumulatively, not to find a definitive answer, but simply to see where it points, there is a direction. The K-call sign for KBBL places the town west of the Mississippi. The distance of Bart's road trip to Knoxville, Tennessee, which he makes in Season 7's Bart on the Road, passing through Branson, Missouri, suggests a departure point somewhere in the central west region of the country, and not so far west that the drive would be impossible, not so far south that Branson would not be a natural stopping point. The presence of mountains in the background of many establishing shots matches the profile of states like Oregon or Northern California or Colorado. The proximity to an ocean, referenced in several episodes, narrows the field further. Al Jean himself said in a 2016 press conference that he would say, judging by the street names and locations in Springfield, the town is closer to Springfield, Oregon, where Matt Groening is from, than to any other Springfield. Then he walked it back. But the words had already been spoken. Springfield, Oregon exists. It is a real town. Its population is roughly 60,000 people. It sits in the Willamette Valley, south of Portland, with mountains visible to the east and the west. Several street names in the show correspond to real street names in Portland, where Groening grew up. Evergreen Terrace, where the Simpsons live, corresponds to a real street in Portland's southwest hills. The characters in the show bear names that are common on Portland street signs. This is likely the closest thing to a true answer that exists, not Springfield, Oregon specifically, not Oregon definitively, but a geography inspired by Oregon, a town that carries the memory of the Pacific Northwest in its bones, a place that feels like the region Matt Groening grew up in, even as the writers work actively to prevent it from being pinned down to any single location. The mystery of Springfield's location is a mystery that was never entirely a mystery. It always had an answer, an approximate one, an intended one. But the writers decided 35 years ago to have more fun with it than that. They decided to turn the geography of their show into a playground, to let Springfield be everywhere and nowhere, to let it have oceans and mountains and deserts and canyons and redwood trees all at once, because that is what American Everytown looks like when you are not constrained by the actual shape of any specific state. There is a Springfield in your state, maybe in your county, maybe close enough to drive to. That is the point. That has always been the point. The writers gave 35 years of fans something to chase and made sure the chase would never end, because ending it would mean Springfield belonged to one place, and Springfield was always meant to belong to everyone. Close your eyes for a moment if you want. Think about whatever town feels most like your town, the one with the diner that has been there forever, and the school that hasn't changed, and the bar where the same people sit on the same stools. That is where Springfield is. It is wherever you need it to be. And when you are ready, we are going to move to the mystery that stopped a nation in the summer of 1995. The one that had a contest with no real winner, an anonymous internet stranger who solved everything in an hour and then vanished, a baby who looked around the room to make sure nobody was watching, and a gunshot that the show has been arguing about in quiet ways ever since. We are moving on to who really shot Mr. Burns. In the spring of 1995, The Simpsons ended its 6th season with a cliffhanger that the show's creators had been building toward for months. It was the kind of event that felt, in the mid-90s, like a genuine cultural moment. The kind of thing that people talked about at work and at school and at dinner tables. The kind of mystery that attached itself to the summer and would not let go until September arrived and the answer came. The episode was called Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. It aired on May 21st, 1995. Its title was a direct reference to the famous Dallas cliffhanger from 1980, Who Shot J.R., which had paralyzed American television for 8 months and proven that audiences would wait a very long time for an answer if the question was compelling enough. The Simpsons version ran for a full summer. By the end of Part 1, for Charles Montgomery Burns, the ancient and ruthless owner of the Springfield nuclear power plant, had been shot by an unknown assailant and left collapsed on a sundial in the middle of Springfield. He was alive but unconscious. The shooter was not shown. The episode ended, and Fox launched a national promotional campaign. A website called Springfield.com went online and began accumulating clues. A toll-free number, 1-800-COLLECT, was established as the entry point for a sweepstakes. Over 500,000 people visited that website over the course of the summer. The prize for correctly identifying the shooter was the chance to be animated into a future episode of The Simpsons. The whole country was guessing, and only one person got it right on the very first night. We will get to that person. But first, Hal, let us spend some time with the episode itself, because the clues that were planted in Part 1 are the foundation of everything else in this mystery. And they are subtle enough that even after watching the episode multiple times, most viewers miss the key details entirely. Mr. Burns spent the lead up to Part 1 establishing enemies throughout Springfield. He stole oil that rightfully belonged to Springfield Elementary School, costing groundskeeper Willie and Tito Puente their jobs and eliminating the school's new financial windfall. He established a solar energy monopoly with a plan to block out the sun over Springfield, cutting off all natural light from the town in order to force everyone to buy his electricity. He fired his loyal assistant, Waylon Smithers, who had served him for decades, after Smithers finally objected to the sun-blocking plan on moral grounds. He developed feuds with Homer Simpson, who was furious because Burns could never remember his name. He angered Barney Gumble, who lost his favorite drinking spot. He enraged Mo Zeislak, whose bar suffered from the sun blockade. He infuriated essentially every significant character in the show. The list of people with motive to shoot Mr. Burns was, by design, almost everyone in Springfield. The writers did this deliberately. They wanted the mystery to be genuinely solvable using the clues embedded in the episode, but they also wanted it to feel open enough that the audience would seriously consider multiple suspects. They succeeded. The Simpsons creator Matt Groening had originally proposed the storyline. A showrunner, David Merkin, suggested that the shooter be a member of the Simpson family. Writers Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who wrote both parts of the episode, structured Part 1 around a set of hidden clues that pointed toward one specific answer if you knew exactly where to look. Here are the clues that were planted. When Burns is shot and collapses unconscious onto the sundial in the town square, his arms fall across the face of the sundial in a specific configuration. His hands come to rest on two letters, the letter W and the letter S. The writers intended this as a pointing gesture toward the initials of the shooter, W and S, or, as the camera angle could also read it, M and S. Both interpretations were deliberate, one a true clue and one a misdirection. Before the shooting, when Burns is confronted by his assailant, and he says 4 words, "Oh, it is you." Those 4 words tell us 2 things with certainty. First, Burns had met this person before. He knew them by sight. Second, his tone was not frightened. He did not sound like someone confronted by an enemy. He sounded more like someone mildly surprised to see a familiar face in an unexpected place. This is the behavior of someone who does not perceive the person in front of him as a threat. This is the behavior of someone who sees someone small or harmless or beneath his notice. Burns's holster is empty when he falls. The DVD commentary for the episode confirms this detail was intentional. The shooter used Burns's own gun, which had slipped from his holster. This means the shooter did not come armed. The shooting was not premeditated in the conventional sense. It was an act of the moment, and a reaction to a confrontation, not a planned execution. The shooter found the gun available and used it. The DNA evidence in Part 2 runs the name Simpson, specifically Maggie Simpson. Now, here's where the episode becomes something more interesting than a simple whodunit. Because when the answer was revealed in Part 2, it was not universally celebrated. In fact, some viewers felt it was unsatisfying precisely because Maggie is a baby, and babies cannot premeditate crimes in any meaningful legal or narrative sense. But the writers had anticipated this objection. They built the ending not around legal culpability, but around something stranger and in some ways more resonant. The setup for why Maggie had the gun at that moment is this. Before Burns was shot, he had made one final act of provocation. He had reached into Maggie's baby carriage looking for something, and in doing so, his gun had slipped from its holster into the carriage, landing near the baby. When Burns confronted Maggie, or perhaps when Maggie confronted Burns, the interaction ended with a gunshot from the gun that had been his, fired now by the smallest hands in Springfield. And then the final shot of Part 2, after the case is closed and everyone has dispersed, after Chief Wiggum has announced his findings and the town has moved on, does something that the rest of the episode does not quite prepare you for. Maggie is alone in the room. She looks around slowly, she checks her left. She checks her right. She confirms, with the deliberateness of something much older than a baby, that nobody is watching her. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that the animator staged to look like someone firing a gun. Not once, like a small, deliberate performance for no one. The writers have never officially confirmed whether this was meant to indicate that the shooting was intentional. It remains the final unresolved element of an episode that was otherwise wrapped up and put to bed. Was Maggie an innocent baby who discharged a weapon accidentally in a moment of confusion? Or was she something else? The show never says. The pacifier moves. The credits roll. Sit with that for a moment before we move on. Now, the contest. What happened to the sweepstakes tied to this episode is a story that did not become fully public until the DVD commentaries were released years later, and it is genuinely strange. The contest was structured as follows. And viewers who used the 1-800-COLLECT phone service during the summer of 1995 would be eligible to enter the sweepstakes. At the end of the summer, entries would be drawn and the winner would be identified as the person who had correctly guessed the shooter's identity. That person would be animated into a future episode of The Simpsons. The contest ended on September 10th, 1995. Part 2 aired 1 week later on September 17th. Fox took the pool of entries and selected 1,000 at random to review. Of those 1,000, not a single person had correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. David Merkin, the showrunner, described what happened next in the DVD commentary with barely concealed frustration. Fox told him they needed to declare a winner. The contest rules are buried in fine print that Merkin said he had not been fully shown before signing. Required that a winner be selected from within the first 1,000 entries. Merkin pushed back. He argued that having no correct answers should mean no winner. Fox refused. A winner was chosen at random from the 1,000 incorrect entries. That person had guessed Smithers. She was wrong. The declared winner was named Fela Gibson from Washington, D.C. She was, by multiple accounts, an older woman who barely watched the show and had entered the contest almost incidentally. When she was contacted and informed she had won, she declined both prizes. She did not want to be animated into an episode. She did not want the real-life replica of the Simpsons house that had been built in Henderson, Nevada as an additional prize. Yet she accepted a cash payment instead, and the matter was closed. Nobody who entered the contest got the right answer, but one person did. The night that Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 1 aired, a person with access to a college email account posted their analysis of the episode to the Usenet news group alt.tv.simpsons. Within an hour of the episode's broadcast, this person had looked at the clues, worked through the logic, and concluded correctly that the shooter was Maggie Simpson. They had identified the sundial positioning. They had noted Burns's lack of alarm at seeing his shooter. They had considered who would not have arrived at that moment with a weapon of their own. They had gotten it right for the right reasons, as Merkin put it on the commentary. The writers found out about this person. They wanted to contact them. Yes, they wanted to give them recognition, perhaps a prize. They had legal restrictions during the contest period that prevented them from reaching out before the sweepstakes concluded. By the time the contest was over and the restrictions lifted, the person's email address had expired. They had been using a college account. Students leave universities. Accounts close. Servers delete inactive files. Bill Oakley said on the DVD commentary, "One guy on the internet got it only an hour after the show aired, and we have never been able to find him. We were going to send him a prize." They issued an open invitation on the DVD commentary discs that shipped with the Season 6 and Season 7 box sets. The production team included a message for this person. They asked them to come forward. They said the invitation was open. And as of the recording of those commentaries, the person had not responded. The newsgroup posts from that period, April through October of 1995, no longer exist in any searchable archive. The server that hosted alt.tv.simpsons during that summer, a service called Deja News, did not archive posts during that window. The posts are gone. Google Groups does not have them. There is no surviving record of the original analysis. The only person who solved The Simpsons' greatest mystery in real time left no trace behind. Their name is not known, their analysis cannot be retrieved. They existed briefly in the record as a username attached to a college account that has long since gone dark, and then they were gone. The alternate endings that were produced to keep the secret are themselves a strange footnote to all of this. Because the writers were so concerned about the answer leaking during production, they created a series of fake endings and distributed them to different parts of the animation pipeline. Only director David Silverman knew the real answer while the episode was in production. Other animators were given footage showing different characters committing the shooting. These fake endings were eventually revealed publicly in the special The Simpsons 138th Episode Spectacular, broadcast later in 1995. In the fake ending shown, the shooter was Apu, who fires multiple rounds rather than one. It was Mo Seslak, it was Barney Gumble, it was Tito Puente, it was Santa's little helper, who somehow held the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. There was also a full-length alternate ending produced in which Smithers was the shooter, which included Burns recovering in the hospital, Smithers explaining his motivations at the bedside, and a consequence of a 5% pay cut. This ending was produced specifically because Smithers was the most obvious suspect and the one the writers knew most fans would guess, and they wanted to have something ready in case the real ending leaked and they needed to pivot. Harry Shearer, the voice actor for Smithers, did not know the real ending when he recorded his lines for both parts of the episode. He found out when he watched the finished broadcast, and there is one more detail that has never been fully resolved. The episode in which Barney Gumble appears as a suspect contains a small but notable anomaly. Barney is the only suspect who was never formally interviewed by Chief Wiggum during the investigation in Part 2. Every other major suspect is cleared through questioning or evidence. Barney's alibi is never established. The DVD commentary for Part 2 confirms this was because Barney was originally considered as an alternative shooter during the writing process. The writers had discussed the possibility of sending Barney to jail permanently as a way of writing the character out of the show. They abandoned the idea, went with Maggie, and Barney simply remained uninterviewed in the finished episode without explanation. So Barney Gumble was never officially cleared. 30 years later, that is still technically true. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history has an official answer. Maggie Simpson, with Burns' own gun, at the sundial in the town square. The evidence supports it. The writers intended it. The episode built to it. And yet the contest that was supposed to celebrate that answer produced no correct winner. The person who actually solved it vanished. Barney was never cleared, and the baby in the final shot looked around to confirm no one was watching and moved her pacifier like she was pulling a trigger. Make of that what you will. Let the room settle again. There is no urgency here. The shooting happened in the summer of 1995. And whatever really happened that day in the town square Springfield, it is over now. Mr. Burns recovered. Homer kept his job. The sun was eventually unblocked. Springfield went back to its ordinary, extraordinary life. But that anonymous person, the one who posted their analysis in the hour after Part 1 aired and then disappeared into the early internet like something that was only ever partially there, that person is still out there somewhere. Older now, presumably, possibly watching this, possibly never knowing that the writers of The Simpsons spent years looking for them, that their name was spoken aloud on DVD commentary tracks that shipped in millions of copies, that a prize waited for them that they never collected. If that is you, the writers wanted you to know they were impressed. They wanted you to know you got it right when no one else did. And the invitation, as of the last public statement on the subject, was still open. We are going to move now to a mystery that is not about a crime, but about an identity. About a man who spent 8 years becoming one of the most carefully developed characters in television. and then had his entire history undone in a single episode, and what happened afterward when the show tried to pretend it had never happened at all. We are going to talk about the man who lived as Principal Skinner for 26 years, and what that story says about who we become when we spend long enough inhabiting someone else's life. This one is slower and sadder than the Burns mystery. Get comfortable. We are going deeper. His name, the name that everyone in Springfield knew him by, was Seymour Skinner. He was the principal of Springfield Elementary School. He had held that position for 20 years before the events of Season 9, a tenure that had left visible marks on him in the way that institutional life always does. He wore a tan blazer. He reported to Superintendent Chalmers, who bellowed his name across parking lots and school cafeterias and the occasional rooftop in tones of weary exasperation. He lived with his mother Agnes in a house that felt too small for everything that had happened to him. He had served in the United States Army as a Green Beret during the Vietnam War, had been captured and held as a prisoner of war, had endured things that the show only referenced obliquely and the character carried quietly. He was uptight and fussy and sometimes petty and occasionally unexpectedly kind. He loved model trains. He was afraid of his mother. From Season 1 through Season 8, the writers built Seymour Skinner into one of the most thoroughly realized supporting characters in the show. He appeared in dozens of episodes. His relationship with Agnes was a sustained comic study in the particular suffering of adult children who never quite escaped their parents. His adversarial dynamic with Bart was one of the show's most reliable engines. His occasional friendship with Homer produced some of the show's warmest material. Harry Shearer, who voiced the character, had given him a specific quality over 8 years of performance. A stiffness, yes, a formality, but underneath it, a real sense of someone holding a life together with habit and structure, because without those things, the sadness would show through. It was a quiet characterization, understated, the kind of voice work that takes years to develop and audiences feel without necessarily identifying. 8 years of this. 8 years of building something recognizable and real. And then came September 28th, 1997, Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. The episode opens at Springfield Elementary School, where a surprise party has been arranged to celebrate Principal Skinner's 20th anniversary as principal. The school is decorated, the teachers are present, Superintendent Chalmers has arrived for the occasion. The celebration is underway. And then a stranger walks in. He is a man roughly Skinner's age, weathered in the particular way that Vietnam veterans are sometimes weathered in the show's visual language. He looks at Skinner. He says that his name is Seymour Skinner. He says he has papers to prove it. He says that the man standing in the decorated gymnasium, the man who has run the school for 20 years, is not who he claims to be. Our Principal Skinner does not argue, he does not protest, he confirms it. His real name, he says, is Armin Tamzarian. He is an orphan from Capital City. He was a troubled young man, a petty criminal, given the choice by a judge to go to prison or enlist in the Army. He chose the Army. In Vietnam, he served under a sergeant named Seymour Skinner. A real person, a decent person, someone whose clear sense of purpose and genuine goodness made Armin Tamzarian want to become something better than he had been. Sergeant Skinner became a mentor. Armin came to admire him completely, to see him as a model for the life he wanted to live. Then Sergeant Skinner went missing. He was declared dead. Armin survived. Rather than disappear back into the life he had come from, Armin went to Springfield to deliver the news to Agnes Skinner, as the sergeant's mother. But when he arrived at her door, Agnes looked at him and called him Seymour. Whether she knew the truth and chose to accept him anyway, or whether she genuinely believed he was her son, the episode leaves slightly ambiguous. Armin could not bring himself to correct her. He stayed. He became Seymour Skinner. He pursued the dream that the real Skinner had once described, to be a school principal. He spent 26 years living as someone else. The real Seymour Skinner, voiced in this episode by Martin Sheen, was not dead. He had been captured, held, and eventually released. He found his way back to Springfield. He found his mother. He found a man living his life. What happens next in the episode is uncomfortable in ways that sit with you longer than comedy usually does. The townspeople of Springfield, and including Agnes, discover that the real Skinner is alive and that Principal Skinner is Armin Tamzarian, and they briefly, tentatively accept the real man in his rightful place. But the real Seymour Skinner proves difficult. He is abrasive with Agnes in ways that Armin never was. He lacks the 26 years of institutional memory that made Armin effective as a principal. He does not know the rhythms of the school or the community. He is a stranger in a life that has been lived without him. Springfield, being Springfield, chooses sentiment over truth. They want Armin back. They want the Skinner they know. And in an ending that the episode presents with obvious awareness of its own absurdity, a judge issues a legal decree. Armin Tamzarian will henceforth be known as Seymour Skinner. He will return to his position as principal. The real Seymour Skinner is literally tied to a chair on a freight train and sent out of town, removed from Springfield physically, unwillingly, what would in any realistic context be a kidnapping. And the judge's decree includes a final clause. The name Armin Tamzarian is never to be spoken again by anyone under penalty of torture. The episode ends. Everything resets. Skinner is Skinner. Life continues. And the audience, particularly the portion of the audience that had been watching since season 1, reacted badly. The episode is, to this day, one of the most contested in the show's history. John Hine, the man who coined the phrase "jumping the shark" to describe the moment a television series irreversibly declines, identified the principal and the pauper as the specific episode in the specific season where The Simpsons made that jump. Writing in his book on the subject, he placed it in season 9, second episode, September 28, 1997. When Principal Skinner's true identity was revealed as Armin Tamzarian, he wrote, "That is when it happened." Ian Jones, writing in The Guardian in 2007, argued that the show became stupid in 1997 and named this episode as the moment it happened. He called it cheap, idle storytelling. He said that taking a major character who had received years of development and unmasking him as a fraud was the kind of thing the show had previously been too smart to do. Alan Sepinwall, writing for the Star Ledger, I noted that the episode was so implausible that even the characters were disavowing it by the end. He was referring to the judge's decree, the self-aware reset button that the episode pressed to undo its own damage. Harry Shearer, the voice of Principal Skinner, said afterward that he had told the writers after reading the script, "That is so wrong." He said they were taking something that an audience had built 8 years of investment in and just tossing it in the trash can for no good reason, for a story that had been done before with other characters. He said this: he was right about the audience's investment. He was right that it felt like a betrayal. Matt Groening later called the episode a mistake. And here is where the mystery deepens, because the mistake did not simply go away. It could not go away, even though the show tried to erase it. The judge's decree within the episode ordering everyone to forget Armin Tamzarian was, in retrospect, the writers acknowledging out loud that they knew what they had done, and they were trying to legislate its irrelevance. But you cannot unring a bell. The episode aired, millions of people saw it. The canon, whatever it meant in a show that had never been strict about canon, now included the fact that Principal Skinner was Armin Tamzarian. The show addressed this in a handful of ways over the years that followed. In season 11's Behind the Laughter, the mockumentary episode that treated The Simpsons as a real family of television personalities, a clip from The Principal and the Pauper appeared alongside other examples of the show's increasingly gimmicky and nonsensical plots. The show was criticizing itself, using its own documentary frame to retroactively describe its own controversy. In season 15, in an episode called I, Annoyed Grunt Bot, Lisa gets a new cat and names it Snowball 2 in order to avoid buying a new food dish. Skinner walks by and chides her for the intellectual dishonesty of the act. Lisa looks at him and replies, "I guess you're right, Principal Tamzarian." Skinner, without a word, immediately excuses himself and walks away. The name had been declared unspeakable under penalty of torture. Lisa spoke it anyway, and Skinner fled. It was a laugh line. It was also the show acknowledging that the episode existed, that the decree could not actually erase it, that the audience remembered even if the characters were legally required to pretend they did not. Then came the attempts at formal retcon. In season 21, an episode called Boy Meets Curl depicted Agnes Skinner as pregnant with Seymour, a real pregnancy, a real birth. This was the show implying, not quite explicitly but clearly enough, that the Skinner we know was Agnes's biological son all along, that the Armin Tamzarian episode had been either non-canonical or simply wrong. In season 26, Walking Big and Tall showed a young Seymour Skinner growing up with Agnes as his actual mother. The scene was unambiguous. This was Seymour's actual childhood, his actual family, not an identity he had borrowed from a dead mentor, his own life from the beginning. Matt Groening confirmed in interviews that he considered the principal and the pauper to be non-canon. The word he used was mistake, and yet. The episode is still in the archive. You can watch it on Disney Plus right now. It is episode 2 of season 9. The events within it were documented and aired in front of millions of people. The real Seymour Skinner exists within the show's universe. He was voiced by Martin Sheen. He was tied to a train. He was sent away. And he has not been seen in a significant way since, except in The Simpsons' tapped-out mobile game, where the show's canon relaxes in ways that the television series itself would not permit. What the Armin Tamzarian mystery leaves us with is something more philosophically interesting than a simple continuity error. It is a question about how identity works in a story that has been running for 35 years. The show decided, for one episode, to say that the person you thought you knew was not who you thought he was. Then it decided that was a mistake. Then it tried to undo it. Then it acknowledged it could not fully undo it. Then it kept building the character forward anyway. But the episode is still there. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, if the universe of the show is taken seriously, tied to that freight train or wherever the train took him, living a life that was stolen from him by a judge's decree in a town that preferred the imposter. The man we call Skinner has a name that he is legally forbidden to acknowledge. He built a life on someone else's identity. He did it out of love and grief and the desire to become the person his mentor had believed he could be. And the show eventually decided that this had never happened at all. Which version is true? The one the show aired in September of 1997? Or the one it built around the character in the seasons that came before and came after? The answer is both. The answer is neither. The answer is that the show contains a wound in its own continuity that it has been quietly working around for nearly 30 years, like a healed fracture that shows up on an X-ray even after the bone has knit back together. Principal Skinner is standing at his podium right now, wherever Springfield is. He is announcing over the intercom. He is being shouted at by Superintendent Chalmers. He is going home to Agnes. He is living his life, the only life he has ever known, under a name that belongs to someone else and a decree that says the real name is never to be spoken. He has never looked at the camera. He has never broken the fourth wall. He has never said to the audience or to himself which version of his story is the true one. The name Armin Tamzarian sits in the record of the show like a stone at the bottom of a very still body of water. You can see it if you look, but the water does not disturb itself over it anymore. Let the room be quiet for a moment. The mystery here is not dramatic in the way the Burns shooting was dramatic. It is more like the mystery of anyone who has ever reinvented themselves, anyone who has taken a name and a history that felt more like them than their original one, and built a life out of it, and then had to wonder late at night in a quiet house whether the life they built was real because they built it or unreal because it was not originally theirs. Armin Tamzarian built the school. He ran it for 20 years before anyone looked closely at the paperwork. Whatever his name was at the beginning, what he built was real. The next mystery we're going to explore is smaller in scale, but larger in what it implies. It is about a crayon. Specifically, it is about a crayon that a 7-year-old boy pushed up his nose sometime in the early 1970s, and that lodged itself in his brain and did not come out for decades, and what the removal of that crayon revealed about who Homer Simpson actually is and what he chose to do when he found out. This one is quieter. It is the kind of mystery that is less about plot and more about character. Get comfortable again. We are going deeper into the Simpson house. Homer Simpson's IQ is not something the show discusses with regularity. There are episodes that gesture at it and episodes that ignore it entirely because The Simpsons, like most long-running animated shows, operates with a flexible relationship to what any given episode established. Characters know things they could not know and forget things they should remember, and the audience generally forgives this because the alternative is a show that is strangled by its own continuity. But in Season 12, Episode 9, the episode titled HOMR, the show did something more deliberate than usual. It asked plainly and seriously why Homer Simpson is the way he is. And it answered that question with something so absurd on its surface that it took several minutes of watching to realize the episode intended to be taken at face value. Homer volunteers himself for a medical research study. He does this to earn $100, which is the kind of motivation Homer has always responded to most reliably. During the study, a series of X-rays are taken of his skull. The researchers examine the images and make a discovery. There is a foreign object inside Homer's brain. Specifically, there's a crayon lodged deep in the left frontal lobe, pressing against the neural tissue there with enough consistent pressure to have been affecting Homer's cognitive function for what appears to be decades. Dr. Hibbert performs the extraction procedure. The crayon comes out. Homer's IQ, measured before the procedure, was somewhere in the range that placed him well below average. After the crayon is removed, his measured EQ rises to approximately 105. Not genius, but solidly average, which for Homer Simpson represents a transformation so dramatic that it changes every aspect of how he moves through his world. What follows is one of the more genuinely affecting sequences the show produced in its later seasons. Homer, with the crayon removed and his intelligence restored, becomes perceptive and thoughtful in ways that feel authentic rather than performed. He notices things, he processes them. He has conversations with Lisa that meet her at her level for the first time. Conversations about the world and science and the things she cares about that she has never been able to have with him before. Lisa is moved by this in a way the show handles carefully, with a particular quality of emotion that comes from getting something you stop believing you would ever have. But Homer is not happier. Intelligence in this episode does not arrive as an uncomplicated gift. Homer's restored cognitive function allows him to see the Springfield nuclear power plant clearly, to understand the actual safety conditions, to write an analysis of the plant's risks that is so accurate and so damning that it constitutes a genuine threat to the operation. His friends at Moe's Tavern find him alienating. His relationship with Bart becomes strained in ways it has never been before, because Homer can now see the full scope of his son's failures, and Bart can feel the judgment behind the awareness. The warmth and forgiving obliviousness that made Homer a comfortable presence in his family's life came, at least in part, from not fully understanding what he was forgiving. He is good at being smart. He is miserable being smart. And so, in the end, Homer makes a choice. He asks Lenny, his friend, to reinsert the crayon, to push it back into his nose, back through the passage it apparently traveled as a child, back into the place in his brain where it had been for most of his life. Lenny performs this procedure with the cheerful incompetence that characterizes almost everything that happens in Springfield. The crayon goes back in. Homer's IQ drops. He goes back to the Homer that everyone knows. The episode closes with a note that Lisa writes and places under Homer's pillow, to be found after the procedure when he will not remember or fully comprehend what was in it. She writes that for a little while she had the father she had always wanted, and that she would always love him. The Homer who wakes up the next morning and finds the note cannot entirely understand it, but he smiles at it. And that, the show suggests, is enough. Here is where the mystery opens. The flashback in this episode shows Homer at the age of 7, playing with crayons in a way that young children do, and at some point pushing a crayon into his nostril. The implication is that it traveled inward rather than outward, lodging somewhere in the passages behind the nose, and eventually, improbably, making its way to the frontal lobe. This is the kind of medical scenario that would be essentially impossible in reality, but that the episode presents without apology. The crayon has been there since Homer was approximately 7 years old. That means Homer Simpson has been living with reduced cognitive function for most of his life, for literally every year of his life that the audience has spent with him, and because a childhood accident with a crayon damaged his brain when he was in early elementary school. But here is what the episode does not resolve. If Homer's warmth, his impulsiveness, his catastrophic loyalty, his inability to perceive danger until it is too late, his profound and genuine love for his family that coexists with his profound and genuine failure to protect them from his own mistakes. If all of those qualities are products of the crayon, then who is Homer Simpson at his core? Is the man with the crayon removed the real Homer, the one who can write clear-eyed safety assessments and have real conversations with his daughter? Or is the Homer with the crayon the real one, the one who loves badly and incompletely, but loves with everything he has? The episode is not quite willing to answer this. It leans toward suggesting that the Homer with the crayon is somehow more Homer, that the cognitive limitation and the warmth are not separable, that you cannot have one without the other. But this is an uncomfortable conclusion when you examine it closely, because it implies that what makes Homer lovable is a brain injury, which is either a profound statement about the relationship between limitation and humanity, or a deeply unsatisfying explanation for one of the most famous characters in television history. There is a companion episode earlier in the series that complicates this further. In Season 10, Episode 2, titled The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, Homer becomes obsessed with Thomas Edison and decides to become an inventor. He goes to his basement and begins building things. The things he builds are not good initially, but over the course of the episode, he produces several genuinely functional inventions, including a chair that rocks and simultaneously dispenses shotgun shells, which is a joke but is built with real engineering logic. He invents a hammer with a head on both sides. He modifies a makeup gun. He makes things that work. This is before HOMR. This is Homer with the crayon still in his brain. The episode suggests that Homer's capacity for creative thinking, for seeing problems and reaching towards solutions, exists independently of whatever the crayon was doing to his frontal lobe. His limitation and his capability existed simultaneously. The crayon reduced his abstract reasoning, yes, but the mechanical and spatial intelligence that showed up in the basement in Season 10 was always there. So the mystery is this: what is actually Homer? Is he the warm and limited man he is with the crayon, the man his family loves and is simultaneously exhausted by? Is he the sharp and alienating man he briefly becomes without it? Or is he something more complicated than either version, a person whose full self contains both the warmth and the capability and the tragic irony that the thing making him capable of connection also made him incapable of understanding the world around him clearly? The crayon went back in. Homer made that choice. He chose the life where he could not fully read the safety report over the life where he could write it. He chose the relationship with Bart that was easy and comfortable over the one that was honest. He chose to go back to not quite understanding what Lisa's note meant over the life where he understood it completely. And there's a version of this that is quietly devastating. And the show left it there without resolving it, which is perhaps the only honest thing it could do. The crayon is back in his brain tonight. It will be there tomorrow. It will be there at 742 Evergreen Terrace in Springfield, wherever Springfield is in a state with no name, in a geography that shifts to serve whatever the story needs. Homer is sleeping in his bed. The note Lisa wrote is somewhere in the house. He does not remember what it said. Let that settle. We are moving now to something that is less about a single episode and more about 35 years of the show's relationship with the actual future. We are going to talk about the predictions, all of them, the ones that seem impossible, the ones that have an explanation, and the one that, no matter how many times you apply statistical reasoning to it, remains genuinely difficult to explain away. The Simpsons has been predicting the future. This is the claim. It shows up every year, usually in the form of a news article listing 3 or 4 things the show apparently predicted before they happened. The articles share well, they generate conversation, and then they get forgotten until the next time something happens and someone finds the relevant Simpsons episode in the archive. The list of supposed predictions is long. Automatic scrolling text advertising seen in public spaces appeared in a Simpsons episode before it became common in real cities. The specific score of a Super Bowl was predicted in a Treehouse of Horror episode. The discovery of the Higgs boson particle, sometimes called the God particle, was anticipated in a mathematical equation that appeared on a chalkboard in a Homer Simpson scene that aired 14 years before the particle was confirmed. An outbreak of a specific disease was described in an episode that predates the real-world event. Smartwatches, video calling, robotic librarians, autocorrect errors on handheld devices, horse meat discovered in food products, the Greek financial crisis, a faulty voting machine. The list goes on. It has been going on for a long time. Here is the honest answer to most of it. The Simpsons has aired 800 episodes across 37 seasons. Each episode is approximately 22 minutes long. The writing staff across the decades has included some of the sharpest satirists in American television. People who pay close attention to technological development and political trends and cultural trajectories. When you write 800 episodes of a show that comments on everything, some of those comments will eventually come true. This is not prophecy. It is volume and probability. If you write enough jokes about enough things, a percentage of them will land on reality eventually. This is the explanation that Groening and Gene and the writers have given consistently. It is a reasonable explanation. It is probably the correct explanation for most of the list. But there is one item on the list that is harder to explain away than the others. On March 19th, 2000, The Simpsons aired Season 11, Episode 17, titled Bart to the Future. In the episode, Bart is shown a vision of the future. He sees his sister Lisa as the President of the United States, an adult Lisa in the Oval Office, dealing with the consequences of having inherited the office from her predecessor. And in the episode, Lisa mentions that she has inherited a budget crisis from President Trump. Donald Trump, named specifically, not a generic businessman, not a celebrity running for office. Donald Trump, named as a former president of the United States 16 years before the 2016 presidential election in which Donald Trump was actually elected president. In 2016, when Trump won the election, writer Dan Graney gave an interview about the episode. He said it was a warning to America. He said they had picked the idea because a Trump presidency seemed like a logical, satirical endpoint for the direction the American culture was moving, whereas a celebrity with no political experience reaching the highest office in the country. He framed it as a conscious, satirical choice, not an accident of probability. This is an important distinction. Most of the list of Simpsons predictions can be explained by volume and statistical likelihood. But Graney's own description of the Trump episode is not an accident of probability. He says they chose it. They named a specific person. They described a specific outcome. And 16 years later, that specific outcome happened. The show's usual defense, that satire sometimes inadvertently anticipates reality, because good satire identifies real tendencies in the culture and follows them to their logical conclusion, does apply here. Trump had been a celebrity presence in American life for decades by 2000. He had appeared on television, been the subject of tabloid coverage, been name-checked in pop culture repeatedly. A satirist in 1999 who was looking for the most absurd imaginable future. American president might reasonably land on him as a choice. But the episode is still there, the name is still there, the timeline is still there. 16 years before it happened, someone sat in a writer's room in Los Angeles and wrote the name Donald Trump as a former president of the United States. The show addressed this in a meta way, as it addresses most things, with a couch gag in the months after the 2016 election that depicted Homer watching the results come in and reacting with horror. The show knew what it had done. It did not pretend otherwise. The mathematical equation with the Higgs boson deserves a closer look. In Season 10, Episode 2, there is a scene where Homer is at a chalkboard working through equations. In the background of the scene, barely visible, is an equation that a physicist later identified as predicting the mass of the Higgs boson, a fundamental particle whose existence was confirmed in 2012 at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. The equation in the background of the scene, drawn as a throwaway visual detail in 1998, reportedly anticipated the discovery by 14 years. The physicist who noticed this, Simon Singh, a British science writer who has written about mathematical physics at length, analyzed the equation and confirmed its relationship to the Higgs boson in 2013. He noted that the Simpsons writing staff has historically included people with advanced degrees in mathematics and physics, and that the equation may have been a deliberate Easter egg placed by a writer who understood the physics and wanted to plant something that would eventually be noticed. This is the key point about the predictions overall. The Simpsons writing room has always been unusually educated. Writers with degrees from Harvard, Princeton, Berkeley, and other institutions have rotated through the show across its run. The comedy is frequently shaped by people who understand science, mathematics, politics, and economics at a serious level. When a physicist hides an equation in a background detail, it is not accidental. When a writer satirizes a specific political trajectory 16 years before it resolves, it may be intuition, but it is educated intuition, the kind that comes from understanding how things move. None of this makes the prediction supernatural. None of it removes the role of volume and probability. But it does suggest that the Simpsons predictions are not simply random coincidences accumulated over a long run. Some of them appear to be the product of careful, attentive, educated observation of the world, translated into jokes that ended up being more accurate than anyone intended, or more accurate than most people noticed at the time. The show itself has commented on the phenomenon with a mixture of amusement and mild discomfort. A season 28 episode opened with a brief sketch in which the writers addressed the audience directly and said something to the effect of, "We did not predict all of those things. Some of them just happened to align. Please stop assuming we know things." The specific framing changes depending on which account you follow, but the tenor is consistent. The show is aware that people believe it predicts the future. The show does not fully endorse this belief, and the show is amused by it. Here is what is genuinely unanswerable. The Simpsons has aired for 35 years. The world it has been satirizing has been changing the entire time. Some of the things it satirized became reality. Some of them were educated guesses. Some of them were pure probability. And at least one of them was the specific name of a specific person placed in a specific political scenario 16 years before that scenario happened, by a writer who described it explicitly as a warning. The question of whether the show predicts the future is, in the end, less interesting than the question of what it means that such a large volume of thoughtful, satirical observation of American life, accumulated across 800 episodes, would eventually overlap with reality at so many points. What does it say about American culture that its trajectory was legible enough at least to a room full of very smart writers, to be mapped in advance? There is no answer to that question that fits neatly into a paragraph. It is the kind of question that unfolds over years, or decades, or as it turns out, over 35 seasons. Let the room settle. We are going to move into something smaller and stranger now, something that does not require the scale of a national sweepstakes or a viral news story to feel significant. We are going to talk about Maggie, about her first word, and which was spoken in secret and heard by nobody in her family. About the last time she was the subject of a mystery this interesting at the foot of a sundial in the town square, looking around to confirm no one was watching. And about what those two moments separated by 2 full seasons of television say about the character the writers quietly built inside the show's most invisible family member. The smallest member of the Simpson family has been sitting in her high chair for 35 years. Maggie Simpson, 0 years old for the entirety of the show's run, the baby. The one who holds the pacifier and watches the room with those enormous eyes that see everything and respond to nothing, or at least respond to nothing that registers on the surface. The one who crawls and toddles and occasionally falls asleep leaning against the family dog. The one who is always present at the table and never present in the conversation. The one who exists at the edge of every family scene, a constant background presence, as familiar as the green couch and the yellow walls and the noise of the television that is almost always on. Most of the time, the show treats Maggie as a sight gag. She falls, she moves in unexpected ways, she appears in places she should not be able to reach. She has a pacifier that makes the sound of a squeaky toy when she draws onto it with the intensity of a jazz musician finding a groove. She is a baby, but across 35 years of episodes, the writers built something else inside Maggie Simpson. They built a character who, in the moments when the show was paying close attention, was something considerably more than a sight gag. Something with an inner life that the rest of the family mostly cannot access. Something that watches and absorbs and processes, and then occasionally does something that reframes everything. Let us start with the word. Season 4, Episode 10, Lisa's First Word, is technically about Lisa. It is told in flashback. Homer narrating the story of when his 2 older children each spoke their first word. The episode is warm and specific and emotionally precise in the way that the best Simpsons episodes from that era were, able to be genuinely funny and genuinely affecting within the same minute. It contains the introduction of Krusty Burger and the way Homer used the television to get baby Bart to stop crying are a detail that feels real in the way sitcom details rarely do. Lisa's first word, as the title suggests, is the nominal subject. She says Bart, not Mama, not Dada, but her brother's name, her sibling, the person she had been watching most carefully from her crib. This is a characterization choice that tells you everything about who Lisa would eventually become. She pays attention to the people around her. She names what she sees. She reaches toward the person she is most curious about. Bart's first word, revealed earlier in the episode, is "Ay caramba," which comes out of his mouth as a single startled exclamation when he sees something shocking. This is also a perfect characterization choice. Bart's first coherent vocalization is a reaction, not a name. It is the sound of someone encountering the world at full speed and responding reflexively. And then there is Maggie. At the end of the episode, after the flashback has concluded and the family has settled back into the present, Homer puts the children to bed. He kisses each of them. He reaches Maggie's crib last. He's in one of those moods that the show gave him occasionally, a quieter mood, slightly sad, a little uncertain of his own worth as a father. He has a moment alone with the baby. He says goodnight to Maggie, he turns away, he starts to leave the room. And then, from the crib behind him, very quietly, a small voice speaks. The voice says, "Daddy." Homer does not hear it. He has already turned, he's at the door. The moment passes without registering for anyone in the show's universe. The audience hears it. Homer does not. The word was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most famous actresses in the world, a woman who had been a Hollywood icon since the 1940s, had come in to record a single word for this episode. The word lasted approximately 1 second of screen time. She recorded it, it was placed in the episode, and the production moved on without fanfare. Daddy. The mystery here is not complicated. It is simple. It is this: the first word that Maggie Simpson ever spoke, the first clear and fully formed verbal communication from the character who is the show's most constant background presence, was a word that was addressed to the one person who did not hear it. Homer was already at the door. He did not turn around. The word was spoken directly to his back or to his absence, to the shape of him as he moved away from the crib. And Elizabeth Taylor said it, and Homer walked away. This is either a joke about Homer's obliviousness, which it is, or it is something quieter. Something about the way that the things children feel most deeply are often the things that parents are least present to receive. Something about the way that love reaches toward its object and sometimes, through pure bad timing or ordinary inattention, does not land. Something about the particular loneliness of the smallest person in a family who is always in the room and never quite in the conversation. The show did not spell this out. It did not need to. The camera held on Maggie's crib for a moment after Homer left. The word hung in the room. And then the episode ended. This is the good mystery around Maggie, the one that is tender rather than troubling. And the troubling mystery came about a season and a half later at the end of season 6, episode 25, at the end of Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1, which we have already discussed, but which bears one more visit specifically because of Maggie. Because the Maggie at the end of that episode and the Maggie who said "Daddy" in the dark of her room 2 seasons earlier are either the same character or they are not. And the answer to that question changes what the show has been building all along. The last shot of Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 2, after the case is closed and the town has moved on, shows Maggie alone in a room. She looks left, she looks right. She checks that no one is watching her with a deliberateness that is unmistakably intentional. Not the random head movements of an infant, but a specific act of surveillance. A check of the environment before an act. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that the animator staged to resemble a gun being fired. The same character, the same baby, 2 moments separated by approximately 2 seasons of television, and the 2 moments do not fit together easily. In one, she is alone in the dark and says the word "daddy" to a father who is already at the door, a word that is pure and unambiguous and warm. In the other, she is alone in a room and performs a gesture of violence, with the practiced quality of someone who has done something and is checking to confirm that no one knows. The writers have never officially connected these 2 moments. They have never said explicitly whether Maggie's shooting of Burns was intentional or accidental. The pacifier movement at the end of Part 2 was put into the episode, which was kept in the episode, was not cut or altered in the decades since, and has never been formally explained. One interpretation: the shooting was an accident. The baby found the gun. Something happened. The pacifier movement is an infant's meaningless gesture that the audience is primed after everything that preceded it to read as meaningful when it is not. The mystery is an illusion created by the audience's pattern matching. The other interpretation: Maggie Simpson did not accidentally discharge a weapon. She made a deliberate choice, in whatever way a baby can make a deliberate choice. And the pacifier movement at the end is the show's quiet confirmation that the choice was intentional, that there was something behind those enormous eyes that registered Burns' threat to her family and responded to it. If the second interpretation is correct, it changes the first moment. It suggests that the baby in the crib saying "daddy" to a father who had already left the room was not simply expressing uncomplicated love. It was the same baby who would later in the town square act with purpose on behalf of that father. It was the same awareness, the same capacity for depth of feeling, the same internal life that the show had been quietly building inside its most invisible family member. The word daddy and the pacifier gesture are two data points in a portrait of a character who is always watching and who sometimes, under the right circumstances, acts on what she sees. The show never told us which framing was correct. The baby cannot speak, not regularly, not in ways that the adults in her life can hear. She watches from the high chair. She watches from the crib. She watches from the pram. She saw something at that sundial in the town square. And the last image the show gave us before the credits rolled on the season was a baby making sure that no one was watching. Before she gave the answer away, Elizabeth Taylor recorded one word. The word landed in an empty room. Homer never turned around. That is the mystery of Maggie Simpson. Not dramatic, not a conspiracy, just a portrait of any interiority in a character who can only express it sideways, through a single word spoken to a retreating back, through a gesture performed when the room is clear. She's been sitting in that high chair for 35 years. The eyes have not changed. There is something that has been happening in Springfield since 1989 that, once you notice it, these becomes difficult to unnotice. It is woven into the fabric of the show so completely that most viewers accept it without registering it as strange. The way you accept the fact that characters in sitcoms wear the same clothes every day without considering how odd that would be in reality. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the floating timeline. It is the deliberate narrative choice, common to long-running animated shows, to let the characters remain at fixed ages across an infinite number of years so that the show can run indefinitely without the complications that come from characters growing up, growing old, and eventually dying. Bart has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa has been 8. Homer has been described in different episodes as being anywhere from 36 to 40 years old, and depending on what the episode requires, and the show does not reconcile these numbers. Maggie has been 0 for 35 years. This is not, on its surface, mysterious. It is simply how long-running animated shows work. The Simpsons chose to do it this way, and it worked, and the show has been running for 35 seasons. The floating timeline is a production decision, not a narrative mystery, except that the show itself keeps undermining the decision, not by accident, not because the writers forgot, but because the writers, across 35 years of production, could not always resist engaging with time honestly, and the places where they did engage have left a record of an alternate version of Springfield that exists in the archive alongside the official one. Consider the flashback problem. In Season 2, Episode 12, And the Way We Was, the show told the story of how Homer and Marge first met. It was 1974. Homer was in high school. Marge was in high school. They were teenagers together, drawn in the style of teenagers in the 1970s, wearing the clothes and the hair of that era. This established Homer and Marge's ages relative to a specific year in a specific decade. By those numbers, Homer and Marge would today be somewhere in their 70s, but they are not in their 70s. Homer is, depending on the episode, in his mid to late 30s or early 40s. Marge is around the same. The show handled this by re-anchoring the flashbacks. Later episodes moved Homer and Marge's teenage years into the 1990s, changing the specific decade without explanation, like keeping the story of how they met, but updating the cultural context to one that was less arithmetically incompatible with their claimed ages. This re-anchoring was done without announcement. The episodes that placed them in the 1970s still exist in the archive. The later episodes that placed them in the 90s also exist. The two canons coexist without resolution. This is the floating timeline expressing itself through specific narrative choices rather than through abstraction. The writers tried to give Homer and Marge a real history, anchored in a real decade, and the show's longevity made that history mathematically impossible, and so the history was quietly moved to a different decade, and the original one was neither acknowledged nor retracted. Then there is season 19, episode 11, That 90s Show, which took the re-anchoring to its logical extreme. In this episode, Homer and Marge's courtship is explicitly placed in the 1990s, complete with grunge music and the specific cultural markers of that decade. Homer is in a band. Marge is a feminist activist. The episode commits fully to the updated timeline. The original fans of the show, the ones who had watched The Way We Was in 1991 and filed away the 1974 setting as canon, received this episode as a continuity rupture. The showrunners acknowledged the inconsistency and said that the floating timeline necessarily required the re-anchoring, that there was no way to keep Homer and Marge in the 1970s without the arithmetic becoming impossible. This was true. It was also a reminder that the floating timeline has a cost. And the cost is that every time the show tells a story that depends on a specific year, it creates a debt that eventually has to be addressed, either by re-anchoring or by accepting the contradiction. But the most interesting expression of the floating timeline strangeness is not in the flashbacks. It is in the flash forwards. The Simpsons has shown the future multiple times. Season 6, episode 19, Lisa's Wedding, takes place in 2010. Lisa is a young woman engaged to a British man named Hugh Parkfield, attending a university in England. Bart is working in demolition. Homer is still Homer. The episode is one of the warmest things the show produced in the 90s, melancholy in a specific way. The way a story about time is melancholy when it is told by people who know they cannot actually go there. In that future, the world of 2010, Bart and Lisa are adults. They aged from the baseline of 10 and 8 years old. They grew up. But then 2010 actually arrived, and Bart and Lisa were still 10 and 8 years old. The future that the show had depicted was simply not the future that happened. 2010 in the show was a projection. 2010 in reality was just another season, season 21, in which Bart was still 10 and Lisa was still 8, and the floating timeline continued to float. The same thing happened with season 11, episode 17, Bart to the Future, set in a future where Lisa is the President of the United States and Bart is a failing musician in his 40s. That future is now in the past. We have passed the year in which it was set. Lisa Simpson has not become President of the United States. She is still 8 years old in Springfield, wherever Springfield is, playing her saxophone and waiting for something to change. The show has depicted Lisa as an adult in multiple possible futures, and those futures are mutually contradictory. In one future, she is a doctor. In another, she is a president. In another, she is the mother of a child. These futures do not agree with each other. Each of them was the product of a single episode's creative choices, and none of them were ever intended to be definitive. This is the deep strangeness of the floating timeline. Not just that characters do not age, but that when the show gestures at what would happen if they did, it produces multiple conflicting visions, none of which are reconcilable with each other or with the version of reality that kept arriving year after year and finding Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8, and Homer somewhere between 36 and 40. There is one exception to the rule. Apu Nahasa Pi Mapetilon, the owner of the Koeki Mart, had octuplets in season 9, episode 12, 8 Misbehavin'. 8 babies, all born in the same episode, all entered into the floating timeline that governs Springfield. And unlike every other child in Springfield, unlike Bart and Lisa and Maggie and all the other children of recurring characters, Apu's octuplets have been shown aging. In later episodes, they appear as toddlers. They are no longer infants. They grew. Nobody has ever explained why Apu's children are subject to aging when no other child in Springfield is. It could be a production oversight. It could be a deliberate choice by a writing staff that rotates and does not always share institutional memory. It could be the floating timeline developing a crack. The most interesting version of the mystery, the one that is worth sitting with in the quiet of a long night, is this. What if Springfield's relationship to time is not a simple writer's choice, but a feature of the place itself? What if something about Evergreen Terrace and the surrounding neighborhood holds certain things in stasis while letting others move? What if Apu's children age because they live far enough from the center of the suspension field, or whatever you want to call it, that they are not fully subject to its effects? This is obviously not a real explanation. It is a thought experiment. But the floating timeline, when you look at it long enough, does not feel like a simple production decision. It feels like a feature of Springfield itself, a quality of the air or the light or the geography, the same geography that refuses to be located on any map, the same geography that can be mountain and desert and ocean simultaneously. Springfield does not move through time the way real places do. Its residents do not age the way real people do. The show has been running for 35 years, and the children are still children. The adults are still the age the writers need them to be. The tire fire is still burning. The three-eyed fish is still in the river. The cooling towers are still breathing steam into whatever color the sky needs to be this week. Time passes in Springfield. Seasons change. Holidays arrive and are celebrated and arrive again. But the people do not change with them. They are fixed, preserved, the same. There is a Japanese word, natsukashi, that means something like a nostalgic longing for the past, but not a sad longing. It is the pleasant feeling of remembering something that was good, a warmth that comes from knowing the thing existed. Springfield exists in a permanent state of natsukashi. It is always exactly as it was. You can return to it at any time, and it will be exactly as you left it. This is either a production decision or it is a feature of the place. In the end, it does not matter which. The result is the same. Springfield is preserved. Its people are preserved. And the show will continue until someone decides it should not, or until a contract expires, or until whatever force has been holding Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and Homer at 38 finally exhausts itself, and the floating timeline hits the ground. We are not there yet. Bart is still 10. The chalk is still in his hand. The blackboard is still waiting. Let the room be quiet for a moment. We are moving into our final mysteries now. The ones that close the night slowly, that do not spike with drama, but settle into something that feels more like wonder than alarm. We are going to talk about a man named Herbert Powell, who was Homer's brother, who built something important and then disappeared from the show. And then we are going to talk about what the futures the show imagined for Lisa Simpson add up to, taken all together as a portrait of someone the writers clearly loved and could not agree on. And then we are going to say goodnight to Springfield. Get comfortable. We are almost there. There is one more mystery inside the floating timeline that belongs here before we move on. A smaller one that has been sitting in plain sight since the very first episode of the show. It does not have a dramatic answer. It does not have a contest attached to it. It does not have a DVD commentary in which the writers explain what they were thinking. It is simply a detail that the show established and never explained, and it has been there for 35 years, and nobody who works on the show has ever said definitively what it means. Marge Simpson's hair is blue. Not metaphorically blue, not a dye job that the show acknowledges as a character choice. Blue. It has been blue since the first frame of the first episode. It is the most visually distinctive thing about any character in a show full of visually distinctive things. Everyone in Springfield is yellow. Hair comes in the standard colors that real human hair comes in, black and brown and blonde and red and gray. Marge's hair is blue. The specific shade has shifted slightly across the show's run, from a particular vivid teal-adjacent blue in the early seasons to a softer, slightly greener blue in the high-definition era. But it has always been blue, and the show has never stopped to explain this. In one episode, and only one, the camera holds briefly on the roots of Marge's hair. The roots are gray. This suggests that Marge's natural hair color is gray and that she dyes her hair blue. But the show never acknowledges this. No episode depicts Marge dyeing her hair. No one in Springfield comments on the color as though it is unusual, because within the show's universe, it appears to be completely unremarkable. Marge's hair is blue, and everyone in Springfield has apparently accepted this as a fact of Marge, the way everyone accepts the tire fire as a fact of Springfield. The most commonly cited in-show explanation, which is itself from a brief and ambiguous visual reference rather than an explicit statement, is that it runs in the family. In the episode featuring Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, and the episode featuring her grandmother, there are glimpses that suggest blue hair may be an inherited trait in the Bouvier line. If this is the case, then Marge's blue hair is a genetic feature rather than a cosmetic choice, which would explain why no one in Springfield treats it as unusual. It simply is what Marge is, but the gray roots complicate this. If the hair is naturally blue, it would grow in blue. Gray roots suggest it grows in gray and is then dyed. A person who dyes her hair blue every several weeks would be making a deliberate choice, and that choice would have a meaning. And that meaning has never been provided. The show does not care about this mystery. It has never cared about this mystery. Marge's hair is blue because Matt Groening designed it that way in the 1980s as a visual signature, a way to make her immediately identifiable in a crowd or a crowd scene, a way to ensure that the matriarch of the Simpson family was always locatable in any composition. The artistic reason is practical, the narrative reason does not exist, and yet the gray roots appeared. The camera found them, or someone put them there. And then the show moved on and nobody said anything. Marge dyes her hair, or Marge has blue hair. Or Marge has gray hair that she dyes blue in order to have blue hair that she presumably has for reasons that the show has never provided. This is a minor mystery. It is probably the least significant item in this entire video. But it has been there for 35 years, and it is worth naming because part of what makes Springfield feel real, genuinely real in the way that fictional places sometimes manage to feel real, is that it contains minor, unexplained details. Not everything has a backstory, not everything has an explanation. Some things just are what they are, and the show trusts you to accept them without demanding an account of their origins. Marge's hair is blue. Homer's brain has a crayon in it. The fire at the edge of town has been burning since before the show began. The fish in the river have 3 eyes. The sky above Springfield is slightly too orange at sunset, slightly too clear at midnight, slightly too much itself to be entirely real. These are the facts of Springfield. They do not require justification. They require only observation. There are smaller mysteries still, layered inside the larger ones like nesting boxes. Janie Powell, who was Lisa's best friend in the earliest episodes of the show, gradually disappeared from the narrative without explanation. She was present, she was named, she had dialogue, and then she was simply less present, and then she was a background character, and the friendship that had been established was never addressed again. She did not move away. So she did not have a falling out with Lisa that was dramatized. She faded the way some friendships in childhood do, not with a dramatic break, but with a slow widening of the space between people until the space is too wide to close. The show treated this as a natural occurrence. Life moves on, people drift, not everything needs a reason. But Janie was real enough, present enough, named enough that her absence feels like something that should have been addressed. And the fact that it was not addressed feels like a small mystery in the accumulation of small mysteries that make Springfield feel like somewhere that has been lived in and not just designed. Nelson Muntz's father was absent from the beginning of the show. He was described as having abandoned the family when Nelson was young. For years, the mystery of where Nelson's father had gone was left entirely open. Then, in season 14, the show provided an answer. Nelson's father was alive and had gone to buy a pack of cigarettes and gotten distracted by a sequence of events that kept him away for years. The explanation was comedic, self-consciously absurd, a joke about absent fathers disguised as a story beat. It resolved the mystery without satisfying it, which is a specific kind of storytelling choice. The choice to close the door on a question not by answering it, but by making the question itself into a punchline. Some mysteries get punchlines, some get answers, some get 35 years of silence. The silence is not always worse. There is something fitting about a show set in a town with no state, running on a timeline that does not move, populated by characters who have been frozen at specific ages for decades, choosing to leave certain questions open indefinitely. The openness matches the stasis. The unanswered questions are the correct accompaniment to the unarriving future. Springfield is preserved. Its mysteries are preserved with it. To resolve them all would be to let something go, and the show has always known, at some level, that holding on is its primary mode. The tire fire burns, the questions stand, the people remain exactly where you left them. That is what you come back for. When you come back, as you have probably come back many times across however many years you have been watching, you come back to find it unchanged. You come back to find Bart at 10, and Lisa at 8, and Homer at the console of the nuclear plant, and Marge at the kitchen counter with her blue hair and her patience. You come back because nothing has moved, because in a world where everything moves too fast and nothing stays, Springfield has the particular quality of something that stays. You can always go back. The town is always there. The doors are always unlocked. The same light is on at Moe's, the same men on the same stools. It has been there since 1989. It will be there for as long as the contracts hold and the audience shows up and the writers keep arriving in that room in Los Angeles with more stories to tell. And when you fall asleep tonight, Springfield will still be there. In whatever state it is in whatever state the show is currently mapping onto the impossible geography of its setting, with whatever version of Homer's brain is currently operational, with Maggie's eyes slightly open in her crib and the gray roots growing in at the base of Marge's blue hair and Skinner in his house on the street next to Agnes, and the anonymous internet poster from 1995 somewhere out in the world. Older now, possibly watching this, possibly never knowing the writers looked for them. All of it exactly as it was. Homer Simpson, as anyone who has spent time with the show knows, is not a person who connects easily with the idea of family success. His father, Abraham Simpson, is a man of rambling stories and misremembered history who lives in a nursing home and whose relationship with his son has the quality of two people who share a house and a last name and very little else. Homer's mother, Mona, was absent for most of his childhood, having gone underground as a fugitive after a protest action at one of Burns's facilities, and the show only let her return for a handful of episodes before giving her a final, permanent death in season 19. Homer's family of origin, in other words, is defined largely by absence, by people who are not there, or who were there only briefly, or who were there in ways that substituted presence for genuine connection. This is the context in which Herb Powell arrives. Season 2, Episode 15, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, aired in February of 1991. If it introduced the concept that Homer Simpson has a half-brother, that Abraham Simpson, Homer's father, had fathered a child before his marriage with a woman from the carnival where he worked, and that the child had been given up for adoption. The child was Herbert Powell. Herbert Powell, as played by Danny DeVito in both episodes of his story, is everything that Homer is not professionally and economically. He built himself from nothing into a successful automobile executive, the head of Powell Motors in Detroit, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He is charming and articulate and confident. He succeeded by conventional measures in all the ways that Homer has not. But here is the thing the first episode reveals about Herb. He is lonely. He has money and a company and a staff and a beautiful house. He does not have a family. He did not know he had a brother. When he discovers Homer's existence, he is genuinely moved by it. He invites Homer to Detroit with a warmth that does not quite fit the episode's comedic register. a warmth that feels real rather than performed. The writers gave Herb Powell the kind of emotional directness that they rarely gave guest characters, a willingness to want something and to say out loud that he wants it. He wants a brother, he wants a family, he wants, after all his success, someone to share it with. And then he lets Homer help with the car. The Powell Motors executives have been struggling to design a car that ordinary Americans would want to buy. Herb has the idea to consult Homer, his brother, on the grounds that Homer is the most ordinary American he knows. He gives Homer complete creative authority over the new model. The executives object. Herb overrules them. Homer designs a car. The car has a massive horn that plays La Cucaracha. It has a special bubble dome over the back seat for the children, to muffle their noise from the parents in the front. It has multiple cup holders. It has an engine designed for tremendous power. It is, Homer believes, perfect. It is, in reality, a disaster. The car costs $100,000 to manufacture. No ordinary American will buy it. Powell Motors is bankrupted by the production run. Herb loses everything. His house, his company, his savings, all of it gone. And Herb blames Homer. Explicitly and directly, he says that Homer is not his brother anymore. He leaves. He drives away from Springfield having lost everything that the episode had established he had built. This is where Season 2 ends Herb Powell's story. Season 3, Episode 24, Brother, Can You Spare 2 Dimes, picks it up. Herb is living in poverty. He has no resources. He has not contacted Homer since the bankruptcy. But he comes back to Springfield for reasons that the episode develops around a plan he has formulated during his time in hardship. He invented something. He built a prototype. He needs $2,000 to manufacture the thing and bring it to market. The invention is the baby translator. The concept is exactly what it sounds like. A device that decodes the sounds made by infants and translates them into language that adults can understand. The device is played for comedy in the episode because babies saying comprehensible things is inherently funny, and because the show is a comedy and this was the 1990s and the audience expected jokes. But take the idea seriously for a moment. A device that reliably translates infant vocalization into language that parents and caregivers can understand would not simply be a novelty. It would be, in any realistic version of the world the show was describing, something close to a revolution in how human beings communicate with their children in the earliest and most cognitively critical period of development. Parents who could understand what their babies needed, not interpret the crying and guess, but actually hear what the baby was trying to say. Those parents would make different decisions, would respond differently, would have different relationships with their children from the very beginning. This is not overstating it. The Simpsons universe has established that the baby translator works. Maggie uses it in the episode. It produces comprehensible language. The device functions. Herb takes the $2,000 that Homer loans him, manufactures the baby translator, and it becomes a sensation. He regains his fortune. He becomes wealthy again. He and Homer reconcile. The estrangement that followed the car disaster is resolved. Herb drives away from Springfield a rich man again, and his relationship with his brother is healed. That is where the show leaves Herbert Powell. That is his last significant appearance. The baby translator is never mentioned again. Herb's wealth is never referenced again. The reconciliation is never built upon. The brother that Homer did not know he had, and then found, and then lost, and then found again, simply recedes from the story like a tide going out without explanation or farewell. The mystery here is not theatrical. Nobody was shot. Nobody stole an identity. The mystery is simply, what happened next? Where did Herbert Powell go? Where is the baby translator? In a universe where every family with an infant could have access to a device that tells them exactly what their baby needs, why is the device never referenced in any subsequent episode, never seen in any Springfield home, never mentioned by Marge when she is caring for Maggie? The practical answer is the floating timeline and the reset between episodes. The show did not carry continuity that closely in that era, and the writers who came to the room in later seasons would not necessarily have felt bound by the specific plot of a Season 3 guest character episode. The more interesting answer is that the show, whether intentionally or not, built a mystery into the Herb Powell story that it never resolved. The baby translator should have changed Springfield. It should have changed the world within the show's universe. It did not, because the show moved on, and Herb was not a regular character, and the universe continued as it had before. But somewhere out there, in the same unlocatable state where Springfield sits, there is a device that can tell you what your baby is trying to say. Herbert Powell built it. Homer Simpson loaned him the $2,000, and then they drove away from each other again, and the device went with them. And nobody has heard from either of them in the context of that particular story in over 30 years. Herb is out there. The baby translator is out there. And the mystery is not where they went, but what it means that they left without trace. That something potentially world-altering was introduced into the show's universe and then absorbed into the silence between episodes. Springfield has a way of doing this, of letting things go, of moving on without looking back, of beginning stories that it does not quite end, not because it forgot them, but because the nature of a show that runs forever is that not every thread can be tied off. Some of them just float, suspended in the air of whatever room the episode aired in, still technically unresolved, like a lot of things in Springfield, like a lot of things in general. Now we come to Lisa. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old since the show began, and she will presumably continue to be 8 years old for as long as the show runs. The floating timeline governs her the same way it governs her family. She does not age, she does not advance in school, she does not move through the ordinary developmental stages that would take an 8-year-old into adolescence and adulthood. But the show has looked at her future many times. More than any other character, Lisa Simpson has been the subject of what-if scenarios, flash-forward, speculative futures, alternate timelines. The show has asked repeatedly and in different ways, who will this child become? And the answers it has given are multiple and mutually contradictory and taken together. They form a portrait of a character whose future the writers could not agree on. Not because they did not care, but because they cared too much and thought about it too often and from too many different angles. Season 6, Episode 19, Lisa's Wedding, is set in the year 2010 and presents a future in which Lisa is a young woman at a British university, engaged to an Englishman named Hugh Parkfield, navigating the question of whether she can love someone who does not fully understand or accept her family. The episode is one of the most tenderly written in the show's history, and its specific quality comes from the melancholy built into its premise. It is a vision of a future that both Lisa and the audience know will not happen. Not because the show will contradict it, but because the show will never get there. Because Bart and Homer and Marge will still be themselves on either side of it, and the future will remain hypothetical. The Hugh Parkfield relationship does not end happily. Not because of anything dramatic, because Hugh cannot love her family, because he finds them embarrassing and small. Because Lisa realizes in the episode's most clear-eyed moment that a partner who cannot love your family cannot love all of you. She gives him back the ring. The wedding does not happen. The future pivots. In Season 7, Episode 11, Marge Be Not Proud, the future is not the subject. But in Season 8, Episode 2, You Only Move Twice, we get another glimpse of a possible future. And in Season 11, Episode 17, Bart to the Future, yet we get the presidential one. Bart to the Future shows Lisa as the President of the United States, adult, powerful, dealing with an economic crisis that she has inherited from her predecessor. She is competent and serious and burdened. She is recognizably Lisa. The specific details of this future are the ones that became briefly famous in 2016 when Trump was elected, but the episode is really about what kind of adult Lisa would be. And its answer is the kind who takes on impossible jobs and tries to do them well. There is a Season 8 episode, Grade School Confidential, and a Season 14 episode, I'm Spelling as Fast as I Can, and many others that give glimpses of trajectories for Lisa, of the kinds of things she might become. She might be a musician, she might be a scientist, she might be in politics, she might be an activist, she might be in academia. The Simpsons movie, released in 2007, does not flash forward, but it does give a version of Lisa in which she has a brief romantic attachment to a boy named Colin, an Irish environmentalist who is intelligent and passionate in ways that match her. The relationship is introduced and then dropped and never referenced again in subsequent episodes because the movie and the show do not share continuity in the way that you might expect. In Season 26, Episode 21, Bully, the show does something that feels like a deliberate acknowledgement of all these competing futures. It does not resolve them. It simply lets them coexist. Here is the mystery that all of this creates. Lisa Simpson has been shown across the run of the show becoming a doctor, a president, a musician, a professor, a lawyer, a mother, a single person, a married person, and many other things. No single version of her future is canonical. They are all hypothetical. They are all the product of a specific episode's creative choices. And because the show has been running for 35 years with the same 8-year-old at its center, all of these futures are perpetually hypothetical. Lisa is always on the verge of becoming all of them, and none of them. This is actually the most honest version of childhood the show could possibly depict. A real 8-year-old is all of their possible futures simultaneously. They have not become anything yet. They are still the space in which all outcomes exist as equal possibilities. The floating timeline does not erase this. It preserves it. Lisa is always 8. She is always the child who could be a president or a musician or a doctor or a mother or all of these things or none of them. The writers across 35 seasons kept returning to her future because they wanted to see what it could be. They wanted to imagine it. They could not commit to one version because committing to one would mean denying all the others. And Lisa, more than any other character in the show, is the kind of person whose fullness requires all the possible versions to be held open simultaneously. Every future they showed her was real. None of them was final. She is still 8 years old tonight. She still has her saxophone. She still has the books stacked on her desk. The futures are still all ahead of her, equally possible, equally unwritten. That is not a mystery exactly. It is something gentler than that. It is the way the show chose to honor her by refusing to close the question of who she might become, by keeping her in the perpetual potential of 8 years old, where everything is still possible and nothing has been given up yet. Hold that thought gently. We are almost at the end. Springfield is quieter at this hour. The town does not sleep in the way that real towns sleep because it is animated, because it exists in the space between episodes, because nothing in it is technically awake or asleep at any given moment. But at this hour, in the imagination, you can picture it quiet. The nuclear plant is still running as it has been running without interruption since Homer first sat down at that console in the opening title sequence all those years ago. The cooling towers are still breathing, the tire fire is still burning, and somewhere at the edge of town, a column of black smoke rising into an orange sky that is always a little cartoon unreal. Moe's Tavern has its lights on, the same men on the same stools. Barney Gumble at the end of the bar, the man who was never officially cleared in the shooting investigation, nursing whatever he is nursing, saying very little. Moe behind the counter, the same position he has held since season 1, looking at his customers with the particular expression of a man who chose this life and is still not sure how to feel about the choice. The Quick E-Mart is open because the Quick E-Mart is always open. Apu is behind the counter. His octuplets are at home, growing at a rate that none of the other children in Springfield grow, subject to time in a way that their neighbors are not. aging their way toward adolescence while the Simpson children hold their positions. At the school, the doors are locked, the desks are empty, but if you stood at the window and looked in, you could see Skinner's office, the plaques on the wall, the model train set that he keeps in the cabinet and takes out when no one is looking. His name is on the door, the name the judge gave him. The name that was declared the only name allowed, under penalty of torture, for everyone in Springfield. He does not think about the other name at night. He has not thought about it in years. It exists in the record of the show in the Season 9 archive, but it does not exist for him in any conscious way. He is Seymour Skinner. He has always been Seymour Skinner. The judge said so. The show eventually agreed. The water in Lake Springfield is slightly radioactive. The fish have 3 eyes. The pollution index on a clear day is enough to reduce a comet to the size of a dog's skull before it hits the ground. These facts are simply true about Springfield, the way certain facts are simply true about everywhere. Every place has its specifics. These are Springfields. On Evergreen Terrace, the light at 7:42 is off. Homer is asleep, his prodigious snoring audible from the sidewalk if there were anyone on the sidewalk to hear it. The crayon is in his brain where it has always been, lodged in the frontal lobe, doing what it has always done, taking the edge off the sharper perceptions so that Homer can move through his world with the uncomplicated warmth that makes him bearable to love. He will not remember the note Lisa wrote. He will not remember fully what the version of himself without the crayon was capable of. He chose this. He goes back to this every night when he closes his eyes. Marge is asleep beside him. Her blue hair, which the show has never definitively explained, which is blue in a world where everything else is roughly realistic in its coloration, is spread across the pillow. Whatever genetic or personal history produced the hair, the show chose never to tell us. It is blue. It is hers. It is one of the show's oldest minor mysteries, the one so small and so constant that it barely registers as a mystery at all. Just a fact of Marge, a feature of her the way the cooling towers are a feature of Springfield's skyline. Bart is in his room. He is 10 years old. He will be 10 years old tomorrow. The year will change, and he will be 10. Decades will pass, and he will be 10. The chalkboard at school will be wiped clean every night and filled with new sentences every morning, and he will be 10 for all of it. Chalk in hand, a small record of his consequences, filling the board behind him, erasing itself and starting over. Bart is the eternal 10-year-old, and there is something about this that is not sad exactly, but that is worth sitting with quietly. To be 10 forever is to be in the year of maximum freedom and minimum consequence. Old enough to act, young enough to be forgiven, old enough to understand the world, enough to poke at it, young enough to believe that poking at it is more likely to change it than to damage it. Bart at 10 is the age at which the world has not yet closed around you, has not yet told you what you're going to be, has not yet collected its bill. He will be 10 forever. Lisa is asleep with her saxophone. Not physically holding it, probably, but in the way that a musician always has her instrument nearby, always knows where it is, would reach for it first if there were an emergency. She is 8. All of her futures are still open. The president future and the musician future and the doctor future, and the one where she meets someone who can love her family and the one where she does not, and the one where she changes the world and the one where she is changed by it. All of them are equally real tonight because none of them has happened yet, and the floating timeline ensures that none of them will happen for as long as the show keeps running. And Maggie. Maggie is in her crib. The pacifier is in her mouth. The eyes are closed, or as close to closed as animated eyes get, and which in Maggie's case means slightly open, as if even in sleep she is watching the room for movement. She said "Daddy" in the dark once and nobody heard it. She fired a gun in the town square and then checked to confirm that no one was watching when she gave the answer away. She has been 0 years old since 1989, and she has been watching since the beginning. The first word Elizabeth Taylor ever spoke for her in the recording studio was a word addressed to someone who had already left the room. That is such a specific kind of beginning, to start speaking and have the one person you're speaking to already walking away, to say the most important word you know to a retreating back, to mean it completely anyway. Daddy. There are 35 years of this show, 800 episodes. The Springfield that does not age and does not move and does not tell you what state it is in. The mystery at the center of the summer of 1995. The contest that produced no real winner. The anonymous solver who posted on the internet in the first hour and then disappeared. The man who lived as Seymour Skinner for 26 years and then had to watch a judge make it permanent and official and unquestionable. The crayon that has been in Homer's brain since he was 7 years old. The baby translator that Herbert Powell built and took with him when he left and never brought back. The futures that Lisa has been promised across 35 seasons that are all still open and none of them final. These are the mysteries the show left, not because it was careless, because it was careful. Because a mystery that stays open stays interesting. Because some questions are more valuable as questions than they would be as answers. Because Springfield was built to be everywhere and nowhere, for everyone and no one. The kind of place that is exactly what you need it to be in the moment you need it. The questions we have been sitting with tonight are not riddles waiting for solutions. They are the show's way of staying alive, of staying in the room, of remaining after 35 years and 800 episodes, and however many more seasons are coming, the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, not with worry, but with something gentler. With the pleasant low hum of caring about something made of lines and color and voice and time. Springfield does not solve itself tonight. The tire fire burns on, the nuclear plant hums. The fish in the river have 3 eyes. The sky above it is whatever color the episode needs it to be. And tonight the episode needs it to be dark and soft and full of stars. The Simpsons will be there tomorrow and the next day. And the day after that. For now, Springfield is quiet, Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie is watching even with her eyes closed. Homer is snoring with a crayon in his brain. Marge is sleeping beside him with her blue hair on the pillow. Principal Skinner is in his house on the street that is next to Agnes's house, dreaming about model trains or military procedure or the word Tamzarian, which he is not allowed to say. Somewhere in a filing cabinet at a radio station called KBBL, west of the Mississippi River, in a state with no name, there is the paperwork for a contest that never produced a real winner. The correct answer was filed somewhere in the early internet, in a post on a news group that no longer exists, by a person whose college email address expired before anyone could thank them. They were right. They got it right for the right reasons. And then they were gone. Maybe they are watching this right now. Maybe they are somewhere comfortable in the dark, listening to this, and they remember. Maybe they have never forgotten. If that is you, the writers were looking for you. They wanted to find you. The invitation was open for a long time, and whether it is still technically open depends on who you ask and whether the people who made the offer are still in a position to honor it. And getting it right, quietly and without recognition, in the first hour of the summer of 1995, and then simply moving on with your life, and that is not nothing. That is exactly the kind of thing that happens in Springfield. Quiet attention, a correct answer, nobody watching, sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. There are mysteries in The Simpsons that come from the show's writers making choices, from a contest that produced the wrong winner, or a principal with 2 names, or a baby at a sundial. And then there are mysteries of a different kind. Mysteries that come not from creative decisions, but from real loss, from real people who were part of the show for years, who made characters that millions of people laughed at and loved, and who then were gone. And the question the show had to answer in each case was the same one. What do you do with a character when the voice that made them real no longer exists? The answers the show gave were different each time, and each answer is a mystery in its own right. not the kind that has clues embedded in episode structure or DVD commentaries, full of writers explaining what they were thinking, but the kind that comes from grief and respect and the impossible task of honoring someone by deciding what to do with the thing they left behind. We are going to sit with 3 of those stories tonight. 3 characters who left Springfield, 3 losses that changed the show in ways that are still visible 30 years later, and the questions that still live at the edge of each one, open and unresolved the way some things stay open because closing them would mean letting go of something that deserves to be held. The first character to understand is Troy McClure. You may remember him from such films as The Contrabulous Fabtraption of Professor Horatio Huffnagel and Gladys the Groovy Mule. You may remember him from his work in educational films, in infomercials, in the kind of project that comes with a budget and a premise that no self-respecting actor would touch if they had any remaining options. Troy McClure was a washed-up Hollywood B-movie actor, a man who had been a name once and was now a presence, always available, always willing to appear in things that other people would have declined, standing in front of cameras with the unearned confidence of someone who has never quite understood that his career ended some time ago. He was voiced by Phil Hartman. Hartman appeared on The Simpsons 52 times across the show's run, from season 2 through season 10. He voiced Troy McClure. He voiced Lionel Hutz, the incompetent ambulance-chasing lawyer who burned all of his personal documents in a fireplace at one point and told the family he was now to be called Miguel Sanchez. He voiced Lyle Lanley, the con artist who sold Springfield its ill-fated monorail in one of the most beloved episodes the show ever produced, Marge versus the Monorail, written by Conan O'Brien. He voiced a handful of other one-off characters across the seasons. Every time he appeared, the writers knew they were giving him material that would produce, as Matt Groening put it, the maximum amount of humor. Groening said that Hartman could take any line and extract from it every possible laugh that existed in the writing. He described the experience of working with him as being spoiled, like of writing for an instrument that made everything sound better than it was on paper. Showrunners Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein gave Hartman a showcase episode, A Fish Called Selma, in season 7. In this episode, Troy McClure's backstory was expanded in ways that the show had previously only hinted at. The rumors about his personal life that had been referenced obliquely in earlier episodes, specifically rumors involving the Springfield Aquarium and its fish, became the engine of a story in which McClure pursued a sham marriage with Selma Bouvier to rehabilitate his public image and restore his access to studio work. The episode is considered one of the finest in the show's history. IGN named it the best episode of the 7th season. Entertainment Weekly placed it among the 25 best episodes the show has ever produced. So Hartman himself loved the character. He said that Troy McClure fans were his favorite fans. He said that voicing McClure was the one thing in his career that he did purely for the love of it, that it felt like an avocation rather than work. He told interviewers that he was looking forward to making a live-action Troy McClure film. He had discussed the idea with the production team. Several of the show's writers and producers had expressed genuine enthusiasm for it. Hartman said he would buy the film rights himself if necessary. He was preparing to do that. He was murdered on May 28, 1998. He was 49 years old. He was killed at his home in Encino, California, shot while he was asleep. He was found dead that morning. His wife was found dead in the same house hours later. He was celebrated in tributes across the industry in the days and weeks that followed. Entertainment Weekly described him as the last person you would ever expect to read about in lurid headlines in your morning paper, a regular guy beloved by everyone he worked with. The cast and crew of The Simpsons were devastated. He was, by multiple accounts, one of the most genuinely loved people in the production. Rehearsals for the show were canceled the day of his death. The episode that aired a few months later, the 3rd episode of season 10, Bart the Mother, was the last episode to contain his voice work. It was dedicated to his memory. His name appeared in the credits, attached to the characters he played for the last time. And then the show made a decision. There had been a brief discussion about recasting. According to the Wikipedia article on Lionel Hutz, citing a later report, the production had considered recasting Hutz with Harry Shearer. This was apparently discussed and then set aside. The show's creators confirmed explicitly, in statements that have been cited consistently in the decades since, that they would not be recasting Hartman's characters. The decision was described as a display of respect, as an acknowledgement that what Hartman brought to these roles was not a voice quality that another actor could approximate well enough to preserve what the characters had been. That Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, as fully realized characters, were inseparable from Hartman's specific performance. The characters were retired, they did not die in an episode, their story was not concluded, they were simply no longer there. After season 10, after Bart the Mother, after the dedication in the closing credits, Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz stopped appearing as speaking characters in Springfield. They have since appeared occasionally in the background of crowd scenes, visible in non-speaking cameos, as if the show is acknowledging their continued theoretical existence within the universe, while refusing to let anyone else speak for them. This is the mystery that remains, not how the characters were retired, not why. But what Springfield lost when they went quiet, The Simpsons' golden age, the one that fans describe when they talk about the seasons that were genuinely great, ran roughly from season 3 through season 8, with extensions into season 9 and occasional brilliance beyond. That era was defined by many things: specific writers, specific showrunners, a specific density of jokes per minute that the show later moved away from. But Phil Hartman was part of it. His specific contribution, the ability to make every line land, to play moral bankruptcy with such comfortable confidence that it read as comedy rather than condemnation, was woven into the show in ways that were not replaceable. Chris Turner, writing about The Simpsons, argued that McClure and Hutz together represented the most significant contribution to the show outside of its permanent cast, and that the golden age of the series is hard to imagine without them. He was not overstating it. The courtroom, the educational film, the infomercial, the personal appearance, all of these Springfield spaces had a specific quality when Hartman occupied them. After he was gone, the show needed other characters for those spaces. And those characters were often good, often funny, but never quite the same. Matt Groening said he had taken Hartman for granted because he nailed the joke every time. He said you did not realize until someone was gone how much you had been relying on what they gave you. The Troy McClure film was never made. The script development that had been discussed was never pursued after Hartman's death. The specific vision of a live-action Springfield story built around the character who was half Hollywood artifact and half confession of everything the industry eats and discards, that film exists only as a thing that was discussed in rooms and then became impossible overnight. It would have been good. And that is the nature of things that never got made. The impossibility of knowing how good they might have been is part of what makes their absence register. There is a monument to Hartman in Springfield, though it is not a monument in the conventional sense. It is the gap. The specific silence in the courtroom, the infomercial that no longer needs a host. The characters who walk through crowd scenes without speaking, present and absent at the same time, still part of the universe that made them possible, still existing in the peripheral vision of every episode, just no longer willing or able to say anything. Matt Groening named a character in Futurama after Philip J. Fry, the full name given to the protagonist of that show, in honor of Hartman, Philip. He also created the character of Zap Brannigan in Futurama, specifically for Hartman, and who had been planning to voice it. Hartman died before Futurama aired. Zap Brannigan was voiced instead by Billy West. The character exists as a place that was waiting for a voice that never arrived. Two of Groening's shows carry the mark of this absence. One in a silence and one in a performance that belongs in some alternate version of things to someone else. The second story is different in its texture, less about permanent loss and more about the particular cruelty that comes from institutional decisions that treat people as budget line items and then are surprised when the consequences of those decisions are irreversible. Maud Flanders was Ned Flanders' wife. She was present from the show's earliest episodes, a background character initially who gradually accumulated personality across the show's run. She was devout in the particular way that the Flanders household was devout, earnest, and slightly overeager in her faith, a warm presence at the edge of many scenes, the other half of the show's portrait of sincere religious conviction without mockery. She and Ned had the kind of marriage that the show depicted as functional and genuinely loving, which was unusual in a Springfield that used dysfunction as its primary fuel. Their relationship was not a joke. It was something the show appeared to actually believe in. The idea that two people could be genuinely compatible and happy in the specific way that Ned and Maud were compatible and happy. Maggie Roswell had been voicing Maud since season 1. She had also voiced Helen Lovejoy, Miss Hoover, and Luann Van Houten. She was a significant part of the show's female supporting presence. In 1999, Roswell was living in Denver, Colorado. The production of The Simpsons required her to fly to Los Angeles for recording sessions. The show's policy at the time did not cover travel expenses for cast members in her category, or the reimbursement it offered was insufficient. By multiple accounts, the dispute that followed was specifically about travel expenses, about the logistics and cost of getting Roswell from Colorado to the recording studio. The exact figures have varied across different accounts, but the fundamental issue was simple. The show was not covering what it cost her to be there. Roswell left the show after season 10 over this dispute, and then the show killed Maud Flanders. Season 11, Episode 14, Alone Again, Natura Diddley. In the episode, Maud is at the Springfield Speedway for a NASCAR race. A t-shirt cannon misfires. The t-shirts hit Maud. She falls from the grandstand. She is dead before the episode ends. The writers gave her a death that was, by design, slightly absurd, not noble or dramatic. The circumstances were t-shirts from a cannon. It was the kind of death that had the fingerprints of a writer's room that was processing something difficult through the only medium available to them, through comedy, through the specific shorthand of situational absurdity that the show had always used to handle things that were too difficult to approach directly. Ned spent the subsequent seasons without her. The show explored his grief with a seriousness that the circumstances of the character's death perhaps did not anticipate. Ned's attempts to date again, in his particular loneliness, his relationship with his faith, while holding a grief that his faith had perhaps not fully prepared him for, these became significant storylines across multiple seasons. The Maud-shaped absence in his life was, for a while, the most genuinely melancholy thing the show was exploring. Maggie Roswell returned to the show in season 14. The pay dispute had been resolved. She resumed voicing Helen Lovejoy and Miss Hoover and the other characters she had played. Maud Flanders did not return with her. Maud was dead. She had been killed while Roswell was gone, and there was no mechanism to bring her back, not in a show that, despite its various flexible relationships with continuity, had treated Maud's death with enough narrative weight that undoing it would have required more than a single episode's logic. Maud Flanders was killed by a contract dispute. The t-shirts were the t-shirts. The contract dispute was the reason. She appears occasionally in flashbacks, in dream sequences, in the moments when Ned's grief resurfaces. Roswell has reprised the voice for these appearances since her return to the show. Maud lives in the past tense of Springfield's timeline, which is the only form of survival available to a character who was taken out of the story not by a narrative choice, but by a bureaucratic one. The mystery here is the simplest one in this section. It is the question of what Maud Flanders' story would have been if the dispute had been resolved before season 11 rather than after. What episodes she would have appeared in, what Ned's trajectory would have been. whether the show would have found the particular melancholy quality that emerged from his grief, or whether it would have gone somewhere else entirely. These questions have no answers. Maud is in the past tense. The t-shirts were the t-shirts. The third story is the one that sits most quietly, that has the least drama in the circumstances of its telling, and that is in some ways the most complete. Edna Krabappel was Bart's teacher for the entirety of the show's run from season 1 forward. She was voiced by Marcia Wallace, who won an Emmy Award for her work in the role in season 3, specifically for the episode Bart the Lover, in which Krabappel becomes emotionally involved in a letter exchange that she does not know is a prank. The episode is one of the most precisely observed pieces of writing the show has produced. A story about loneliness that is also a story about kindness, about a boy who starts something carelessly and finishes it with unexpected care. Wallace voiced Krabappel for 24 seasons. She appeared in the show's 500th episode. She continued voicing the character through season 24. She died on October 25, 2013. She was 70 years old. The show made no announcement before the next episode aired, but the chalkboard gag in the season 25, episode 4, Regrettings and a Funeral, contained a tribute. Bart stood at the board and wrote over and over the same sentence. "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." He did not write it as punishment. He wrote it as something else. Edna Krabappel was not killed in an episode. She was not given a dramatic send-off. Her death was handled off-screen and acknowledged obliquely in the way that Springfield handles the things it does not have enough room to hold. Her death was confirmed in the season 25 episode The Man Who Grew Too Much, which contained a reference that established she had passed away. But the specific circumstances of her fictional death were not shown. The audience was simply told that Mrs. Krabappel was no longer there. The production did not recast the character. They retired her as they had retired Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, as an acknowledgement that the character and the voice were inseparable. Unlike those retirements, Krabappel's absence was acknowledged within the show rather than simply allowed to happen. The chalkboard tribute made it explicit. The writing staff loved Marcia Wallace. The character she had built over 24 years had been loved by the audience. The tribute was not subtle. It was not hidden in a background detail. It was in the most prominent visual location the show has, the chalkboard gag at the beginning of every episode, the first thing the audience reads before the story starts. "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." She was in the classroom for 24 seasons. She graded Bart's papers. She dated Ned Flanders, briefly and unexpectedly, in a storyline that gave both characters something they had not had before. She sat at her desk with the particular exhaustion of someone who chose a career out of idealism and has been slowly discovering the distance between idealism and reality, but who has not yet entirely given up, and who might not give up, and who keeps showing up. The room is empty now. The show continues around it. There have been occasional references to a substitute, to the need to fill the position, to the fact that Springfield Elementary has a Bart Simpson problem and no one quite willing to be his teacher again. But nothing has filled the space that Marcia Wallace occupied for 24 years, not in the way that she occupied it, not with that specific quality of exasperation and persistence and buried, stubborn warmth. The chalkboard gag runs every week. Different sentences, different punishments, and occasionally, when the writers feel it is right, a remembrance. A name, a line that is not a joke and is not pretending to be. These 3 losses are part of Springfield's story now. They are built into the archive. You can watch episodes from the period when Hartman was present and feel the specific quality of what he brought, and then watch episodes from after and feel its absence without necessarily identifying what you are feeling as an absence. You can watch the episodes where Maud Flanders is alive, and then the episode where she dies, and then the episodes where Ned lives without her. And the weight of what the show made of that grief is real, regardless of the bureaucratic thing that caused it. You can watch Bart at the chalkboard in season 25 writing Mrs. K's name over and over and feel the specific quality of that tribute. The fact that it is not a joke, the fact that the show knew the difference between this moment and the jokes and chose not to make it a joke. Springfield carries its losses differently than real places do. It cannot age through them. It cannot let the people they left behind grow old and gray in the way that grief ages real people. But it can let them linger. It can let the empty spaces remain empty rather than filling them too quickly with something that would only underline the absence. Troy McClure is in the crowd scenes, not speaking. Maud Flanders is in Ned's memories and the occasional dream sequence. Edna Krabappel's name is on the chalkboard. The voices that made them real do not come back. But in Springfield, as in all places that matter, the people who are there leave marks that do not fully go away. They are in the record, they are in the archive, they are in the specific quality of certain episodes that cannot be replicated because the person who made them that way is no longer available to make anything. That is not a mystery with a solution. It is a mystery that simply is. The shape of an absence, the fact of something irreplaceable. It is late now in Springfield. Later than it usually is when we visit. The lights are lower, the sounds are quieter, the tire fire is still burning at the edge of town, as it has been burning since before the show began, as it will presumably continue burning long after we have stopped watching. Somewhere in the show's universe, Troy McClure is walking through a crowd without speaking. Maud is in a photograph on Ned's shelf. Edna's desk is at the front of a classroom. The chalkboard behind it is clean. We'll really miss you, Mrs. K. Springfield remembers in the only way it knows how, imperfectly, incompletely, but consistently and with a kind of quiet loyalty that does not require acknowledgement. The show goes on. It always goes on. It has been going on for 35 years, and the promise is that it will keep going. But some of the best parts of it live now only in the archive. In the seasons where those voices were present, in the particular quality of the jokes that only worked because of the specific people making them. And when you go back to those episodes, when you find them on whatever platform you use and you watch them in the dark at whatever hour of the night this is, you are hearing something that cannot be added to. Something finished, something that was exactly what it was for exactly as long as it lasted, and that exists now in the permanent record of the show as a measure of what the show is capable of being. That is not a small thing. It is, in its own way, the largest thing. Sleep well. There's a man in a prison cell somewhere in Springfield. He has been in that cell, or cells like it, across dozens of episodes and 35 years of television. He got out each time through some mechanism or another. Through parole, through a radio host manufacturing public sympathy, through work release, through a prisoner swap, through a sympathetic reverend declaring him a changed man. And each time he got out, he executed an elaborate plan, and each time the plan was foiled, and each time he went back in. The cell door closes, the theme music plays, the credits roll. His name is Dr. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger, Jr. You know him as Sideshow Bob. He is voiced by Kelsey Grammer, who got the role in 1990 because writer Sam Simon called him and asked if he could still sing. Grammer said yes, as Simon asked him to sing a Cole Porter song. Grammer sang Every Time We Say Goodbye. Simon said that is the foundation of Sideshow Bob, and the role was his. Grammer expected it to be a one-time appearance. He has now voiced the character across more than 30 years of episodes and calls Bob the most popular character he has ever played. Bob first appeared briefly in Season 1, Episode 8, The Telltale Head, as a non-speaking background character, Krusty's sidekick, a tall man with an extraordinary vertical mass of palm tree-styled hair. His first significant role came in the Season 1 finale, Krusty Gets Busted. In that episode, Bob framed Krusty the Clown for armed robbery because he could no longer endure the abuse of being a sideshow, of being the object perpetually hit in the face with a pie, to the straight man who received the pie rather than delivered it. He is a Yale University graduate with a doctorate. He speaks with a transatlantic accent. He has refined cultural tastes in opera, musical theater, and literature. He is constitutionally unsuited to being anybody's sideshow. He framed an innocent man rather than spend another day in the role. And Bart Simpson, Krusty's biggest fan, noticed the inconsistency in the evidence and got Bob convicted. This is the origin of the show's longest-running grudge. A 10-year-old boy and a Yale-educated genius, bound together by a single act of accidental exposure, playing out their chase across season after season with the specific quality of a story that both parties know cannot end. The coyote cannot catch the roadrunner. The roadrunner cannot finally elude the coyote permanently. The structure requires the chase to continue. The show built its sideshow Bob stories on this understanding, and the understanding is correct. There is no satisfying resolution because the resolution would end something that works precisely because it does not resolve. Bob's subsequent releases from prison are themselves a catalog of the show's inventiveness with the constraint it built for itself. In Black Widower, the season 3 episode that constitutes his first major return, he is released after becoming engaged to Bart's Aunt Selma through a prison pen pal program. His plan to murder Selma for her insurance money after the wedding is foiled by a piece of incriminating evidence that Bart notices. He goes back to prison. In Sideshow Bob Roberts, season 6, episode 5, a right-wing radio host named Birch Barlow uses his show to manufacture public sympathy for Bob's supposedly unjust imprisonment, pressuring Mayor Quimby into a release. Bob runs for mayor of Springfield, wins through voter fraud that Bart and Lisa expose, and returns to prison. In Cape Fear, season 5, episode 2, he is simply paroled. The Simpson family enters the Witness Protection Program. He tracks them to a houseboat. Bart delays his murder by asking Bob to sing the entire score of HMS Pinafore. Bob obliges because Bob cannot help himself around Gilbert and Sullivan, and the police arrive while he is still singing. He goes back to prison. In Brother from Another Series, season 8, episode 16, he is released into the custody of his brother Cecil, voiced by David Hyde Pierce. Cecil's presence is one of the show's richest meta-jokes. David Hyde Pierce played Niles Crane, the snobbish, cultured younger brother of Kelsey Grammer's Frasier Crane in the sitcom Frasier. The Simpsons cast them as brothers with the same dynamic and later brought in John Mahoney, who played Martin Crane in Frasier, as their father. 3 actors from the same show, playing 3 members of the same family in a different show, exploiting the audience's awareness of the original relationship to give the Simpsons version a layer of resonance it would not otherwise have. The mystery of Sideshow Bob is not about the prison releases. The mechanics of each escape or parole can be followed logically. The mystery is about what the character represents and why the show has been unable to resolve him for 35 years, and whether that inability is a failure or a feature. Bob is, by design, the most intellectually capable villain the show has. He has a doctorate, he plans elaborate schemes, he has musical talent that the show exploits in every episode, finding ways for him to sing, because Kelsey Grammer's voice is too good an instrument to leave unused. He is capable of genuine goodness. In Brother from Another Series, when he thinks his brother Cecil is building a dam for the legitimate benefit of Springfield rather than to embezzle money, Bob throws himself into the project with genuine professionalism and care. The version of Bob who wants to do good work is as convincing as the version who wants to murder Bart. Both versions are real. Both are the same person. The writers acknowledged by season 7 was that they were having difficulty finding new ways to bring Bob back. By that point, he had appeared in 4 dedicated episodes, and the creative challenge of inventing a new mechanism for his release and a new scheme for his revenge was starting to strain. They established an internal rule early in the show's run that Bob must return to prison at the end of every episode. This rule was eventually abandoned. Later episodes let him exist outside prison more freely, let him appear in contexts that were not organized around the murder of Bart's structure. He went to Italy with his family. He ran for political office again. The character evolved past the original premise without finding a new one. The thing that was never resolved, and that the show's structure makes it impossible to resolve, is the question of whether Bob can actually become what he claims to want to be. In every episode involving him, he declares some version of a desire for a better life. He wants to be a legitimate theater director, a respected politician, a reformed criminal contributing to his community. The declarations are genuine. The voice that delivers them is incapable of sounding dishonest. And then something triggers the old anger, usually Bart's proximity or some minor provocation to his dignity. And the plan reasserts itself. The better life recedes. The theme music plays when he gets out and plays again when he goes back in. Bob is one of the most sustained character studies the show produced. Not in the way that Lisa is a character study, through the accumulation of small observations across many seasons, but in the compressed intensity of each dedicated episode. Every Bob story is a short story about a man who contains two incompatible versions of himself and who has spent decades choosing each time the version that guarantees his own defeat. He is not stupid. He knows exactly what he is doing. He chooses the murder plot over the legitimate life every single time, and some part of him knows that the murder plot will fail because it always fails, and some part of him chooses it anyway because the legitimate life, the one where he is not Sideshow Bob, the one where nobody has seen him beg for his dignity with a pie in his face, does not contain enough of what he needs. Kelsey Grammer initially thought Bob would appear once and be forgotten. 35 years later, he is still in the cell. The door opens. The theme plays. He gets out. He makes his plans. Bart foils them. He goes back. The mystery of Sideshow Bob is the mystery of anyone who keeps returning to the same pattern despite knowing where it leads. The show could not resolve him because this particular pattern does not resolve. It repeats. And it will keep repeating for as long as there is a show to put him in, because a Yale-educated man with a baritone voice and a doctorate and a plan to murder a 10-year-old is too specific and too strange and too right to let go. The cell door is open right now, somewhere in the unseen parts of Springfield tonight. Bob is standing at the threshold, looking at the world he keeps trying and failing to enter. The theme music is already starting in his head. He will be out again soon. The second mystery is not about a villain. It is about Homer Simpson's best friend, the one who has been in the background of Moe's Tavern since the very first episode, on the same stool with the same beer, producing the same belch. The one who has been the butt of the same joke for 35 years. The town drunk, the cautionary tale, the man who chose Duff over everything else. Barney Gumble was going to Harvard. This is the canon. The flashback that establishes it appears in the show's early seasons, when the writers were still working in the mode of building real histories for the people they had placed in Springfield. Barney Gumble was a straight A student at Springfield High School. He was Harvard-bound. He had the grades, he had the ambition, he had the kind of future ahead of him that most of the people in Springfield never came close to having. And then Homer Simpson offered him a beer. The night before the SATs, which is the night that Barney's future was still intact, Homer gave him a can of Abe Simpson's beer. Barney took his first sip. He quickly drained the entire can. His clothes and hair became disheveled almost immediately in the rapid physical deterioration that the flashback depicts with a kind of bleak comedy that is funnier and sadder the older you get. He ran out of Homer's house. He took the SATs the next morning with his first hangover. He did not get into Harvard. Homer's beer did not cause Barney's alcoholism. One beer does not make someone an alcoholic. But the show presents this moment as the hinge point, the night when the track changed, when the Harvard-bound Barney became the Moe's Tavern Barney, as though the beer was less a cause than a catalyst, of the thing that unlocked something already waiting inside him, that gave a name and a direction to a self-destructive tendency that would have found its form eventually, but found it that particular night at Homer's house. The Simpsons Wiki's description of this is one of the darkest lines the show ever committed to its own mythology. It says in a quotation from an early episode that Homer spared Barney the shame of an Ivy League education and the burden of steady employment. This is written as a joke. It functions as a tragedy. Barney has a beautiful singing voice, an Irish tenor voice, the show calls it, which is precisely the opposite of his speaking voice and his belching voice and the voice that most people in Springfield have ever heard from him. The talent was discovered accidentally in the season 5 episode Homer's Barbershop Quartet, when Homer, Apu, and Principal Skinner heard him singing in the restroom at Moe's Tavern and realized that inside the man they had dismissed as the town drunk there was a natural musical gift. They formed a barbershop quartet, the B Sharps, which won a Grammy Award. Barney spent this period involved in a relationship with a Japanese conceptual artist, which the show treats as an absurdist joke, but which is also, if you look at it directly, the show's portrait of who Barney might have been without the beer. Someone with cultural interests and artistic sensibilities and the kind of strange, specific magnetism that occasionally breaks through his alcoholism when the circumstances are right. In season 6, episode 18, A Star Is Burns, Barney made a documentary film. He titled it Pocahontas. The film is a short, black and white study of his own alcoholism, the kind of self-aware, formally rigorous artistic work that is simply not supposed to come from the person sitting at the end of the bar at Moe's. It won the top prize at the Springfield Film Festival. The judges, including Roger Ebert appearing as himself, are moved by it in a way that surprises everyone, including Barney. And then his prize was announced, a lifetime supply of Duff beer. Barney looked at the prize. He took the Duff. He went back to the stool. The show gave him one more serious attempt. In season 11, episode 18, Days of Wine and Doses, Barney watches a video of his own drunken behavior at his birthday party and is horrified by what he sees. He goes to Alcoholics Anonymous. He cleans himself up. He takes helicopter lessons. He becomes a capable pilot, competent and focused, and recognizably the person the flashback told us he had been before the beer. He remained sober by the episode's end. Then he relapsed. The season 14 episode I'm spelling as fast as I can confirmed it. The sobriety arc ended without ceremony in a single line of dialogue, and Barney returned to the stool. The mystery of Barney Gumble is this. The show told us who he was before Homer's beer, and then showed us everything he was capable of being even after it. The singer, the filmmaker, the pilot, the astronaut candidate who nearly went to space when he was sober in Deep Space Homer, and then placed all of that capability back on the bar stool at Moe's Tavern over and over, episode after episode, for 35 years. It kept showing you what Barney could have been. It kept returning him to what Barney is. This is not a resolution, it is a portrait. A long, slow, affectionate, devastating portrait of the specific mechanism by which capability and self-destruction coexist in the same person, both entirely real, neither ever fully canceling the other. Barney's singing voice is in there right now. His helicopter skills are in there. The SAT scores that would have been Harvard scores are in there, preserved somewhere beneath the decades of Duff. In the same brain that still produces, occasionally, a line of something that sounds almost like the person he was going to be. Homer gave him the beard. The show never blamed Homer for this, not explicitly. Homer does not appear to carry the weight of it. He introduced his friend to the thing that destroyed his friend's potential, and then they went on being friends in the same bar for the rest of their lives. And the thing that was destroyed is something only the audience is fully aware of, because Homer never saw the flashback. Homer does not know what he did. Barney knows. He made a film about it. He won a prize for the film. He accepted the beer anyway. He is at Moe's right now in the part of Springfield that is always late evening. The stool is the same stool. The Duff is the same Duff. The belch is the same belch. And somewhere inside that, the Irish tenor voice is still there, The Harvard grades are still there. All of it exactly where it always was, waiting for the right night, the right circumstance, the right version of Barney to step forward and use it. He has not used it tonight, but he has used it before. The film exists. The Grammy exists. The helicopter hours exist. The show remembers even when Springfield does not. Springfield is very quiet now. The questions we came with tonight have all been named, if not answered. The mysteries are where we left them, open in the specific way that good mysteries stay open, not because the answers are hidden, but because some questions are more useful as questions. Some doors are worth leaving ajar. The town is still there. It has been there every night for 35 years. It will be there when you fall asleep, and it will be there in the morning, and Barney will be on his stool, and Bob will be in his cell or just outside of it. And Maggie will be watching from the crib with her eyes slightly open. And Homer will be sleeping with a crayon in his frontal lobe, and somewhere in the unlocatable geography of a state with no name, the same lights will be on that were on last night and the night before and the night before that. Nothing moves in Springfield unless the show asks it to. Nothing ages unless a writer decides it should. Nothing ends unless the contract expires or the audience leaves, and neither of those things has happened yet. Sleep well. The questions will still be there tomorrow. They always are.